Back in 2001, I was living in Glasgow, working a soul-crushing office job, and I really needed a break. So I took a week off and headed up to hike a section of the West Highland Way. I'm an experienced hiker, and I know how to handle myself in the backcountry. I had this spot in a remote glen that I'd scouted on a map, miles from any town, wedged between two big ridges. It was exactly what I wanted as well, quiet and total isolation. The first couple of days were fine too, but the night that this happened was just really off. It was dead silent, but in a weird way. I mean, usually you get the wind or some wildlife, but that night it was like the world just held its breath. Around midnight, I stepped out of my tent to check the perimeter. It was cloudy as heck, basically pitch black, and I shone my headlamp toward the tree line about 50 yards out, scanning the area, ready to go and pee, and that's when I saw something. Just a glimpse, but it was a face, perfectly white and stark against the dark bark of a tree. It didn't look like a mask, it almost looked like bone. It was peeking out from behind the trunk, though, perfectly still, and I froze, my heart kicking into my throat, and I focused my light on it, and it didn't move. It just sat there, staring, if you can call it that, with features that looked flattened and really wrong. Then, in the split second that I blinked, it was gone. I think it ducked behind the tree. I didn't go any closer, though. I didn't even check to see if it was a person. I just grabbed my gear, and I didn't have the guts to hike out in the dark, so I huddled in my tent until the first hint of grey light, gripping my knife like it was actually going to do something. As soon as there was enough light to see the trail, though, I packed up and I moved quickly. I was about 3 miles into the hike back to the trailhead too when I felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you feel like somebody's watching you. I stopped and looked back, but there was nothing. But for the next 6 hours, every time that I stopped for water or to adjust my pack or whatever, I would see it again. I would hear things moving around me. I think that I saw something at one point too, a flash of white behind a ridge, a patch of pale color darting behind a boulder a few hundred yards off the path. It felt like I was being herded almost, and my pulse was redlining the entire time, and I didn't take a single break after that. I didn't eat, I didn't drink. I just put one foot in front of the other, listening to the crunch of my own boots, trying to ignore the snapping of the twigs that were happening all around me at different times. When I finally hit the trailhead too, I didn't look back. I practically threw myself into my car, locked the doors instantly, and drove until I was back in the city, where I downed a couple of pints. I haven't been back to the Highlands since then, and quite honestly, I'm not making any plans to ever return there again. The house that I grew up in was one of those sprawling, split-level builds from the 70s. My bedroom was tucked away in the back corner of the basement level, separated from the rest of the house by a door that never quite latched properly. To a kid, it felt less like a bedroom and more like a bunker, really. The walls were finished with that dark, heavy wood paneling that seemed to soak up light, and since the window was small and at ground level, the room was perpetually trapped in a state of sort of muted grey twilight. I spent most of my childhood in that room, though, and for the most part it was fine, really. But there were nights, the ones where the house felt particularly hollowed out by the wind, where the air in that space would just sort of, I don't know, feel strange. I remember one specific night in the late 90s, too. I was about 14, laying in bed, staring at the knots in the wood paneling that looked uncomfortably like eyes. We all do that, right? But it must have been about 3:30 in the morning, the kind of hour where the silence of the house stops being peaceful and starts feeling a little bit creepy. I was just sort of laying there in the pitch dark when the clicking started. It wasn't a mechanical sound exactly. It was sort of like somebody snapping their fingers. It started at the foot of my bed, low to the floorboards. I didn't move. I stayed rigid, my hands tucked tight under my pillow, my entire body literally locking up in a way that felt almost involuntary. And the sound was deliberate too, and it moved up the left side of the bed, slow and steady and precisely. When it stopped, it was right next to my head too. Then I felt a subtle sickening depression in the mattress. It was a slow weight, the way that a person leans over someone sleeping, testing the springs a little bit. Then there was this sharp, rattling, inhaling sound, followed by a long whistling exhale that smelled terrible. The breath was so close to me too that it sort of moved my hair on my temple a little bit. My heart was absolutely racing, but strangely, I didn't scream. I didn't call for my parents too. I just laid there, eyes wide open, waiting for the weight to shift. I then whispered, "Who are you?" into the darkness. There was no answer, but the weight on the mattress pushed down harder, and the whistling breath quickened. It became sort of frantic and shallow and jagged, and it almost seemed like it was trying to match my own breathing. I took a sharp, gasping breath, and a split second later, the thing in the room inhaled too. I exhaled, and it mirrored me with a wheezing, laboring whistle. I sat there in the dark, listening to this, and then, just as abruptly as the pressure had arrived, it just vanished. The mattress literally bounced back as if a weight had been lifted. The air in the room lightened, and the sort of staticky feel in my ears cut out completely. I bolted upright and slammed my hand onto the bedside lamp, but the light only revealed the empty, quiet room. I got up, though, and I checked the closets, looked under my bed, and I even went out into the hallway to check the locks on the doors. But there was nothing. I ended up just laying there all night, trying to understand whether or not I'd had a dream, a nightmare, or if what I had just experienced was real. I never did tell my parents. Honestly, I don't think they would have understood or believed me. They were the type of people that would have blamed something like this on a draft or the old house settling or something like that. But I knew the difference between the wind and lungs, and although it didn't feel like a haunting, it certainly didn't feel like a prank either, or like I dreamed it or anything. It felt like something was actually there, and like I said, I was awake for the rest of the night, and I don't think that I was having a nightmare or anything. And even now, years later, when I'm lying in my own bed and the house goes perfectly unnaturally quiet, as they do sometimes, I still catch myself holding my breath. I stay still, and I remember that moment, and pray that whatever that was doesn't come back. I really don't know how else to put this, but I think I've been living with something that doesn't want me here. So I moved into this loft in downtown Gary, Indiana, about 3 months ago. Honestly, I did it because the rent was dirt cheap and the space, this massive vaulted thing in an old industrial building, looked really cool. Lots of exposed brick, iron beams, all that sort of stuff. It looked like the kind of place that had a real history too, which I thought was really cool. Now, I'm a pretty rational guy. I work in data and I believe in what I can see and measure. I figured that ghosts were just for movies and people who watch too much cable TV, but Gary is a bit of a weird place. It's a city that feels like it's still grieving a little bit. The buildings here, they just hold on to stuff, I think. And about 2 weeks ago, after I moved in, things started getting a bit weird. At first it was just small stuff too, like I'd lose my keys, only to find them sitting right in the middle of my kitchen table where I'd already checked 3 times before. My front door, which I am obsessive about locking, would be standing wide open when I got home from work. I started telling myself that I was just a scatterbrain, or maybe the old lock was faulty or something. But then I would hear these sounds. It always happened at night, like clockwork, at 3:33 in the morning, and it's like somebody's walking around in the rooms. And not a house settling creak or anything like that too. It's direct impact, like somebody's stomping around on the other side of the wall. The air in the place started feeling heavy too, like the pressure was dropping right inside of my apartment. In fact, it reminds me of when you're in a plane and you're sort of coming down to land. It makes your ears pop and you get this weird taste in your mouth too. And it's not just creepy, it's beginning to become malicious almost. It feels like there's something in the room with me that isn't just watching but waiting for me to crack or something. I finally got fed up with it last week too. I started knocking on the drywall in my closet, convinced that I'd find a leak or some sort of loose insulation causing the sound. But instead I found a hollow spot in the studs. I noticed that I could actually move some of the drywall away, and tucked into the shadows was this small beat-up wooden box. The lid was carved with these jagged interlocking symbols that I don't know what they are, but it definitely looks sort of occultish or something. Inside was a silver pocket watch that looked like it had been squished by like a hydraulic press. But the second that my fingers brushed that box, the whole loft just went completely dead silent. It was so eerie too, and I got goosebumps instantly. There was no traffic, no wind, no hum of the fridge, just the whole place was like in a bubble of silence. And then the smell hit me. It smelled like decay and rotting eggs, and it was horrendous. I watched horrified as the paint on the ceiling as well literally started to bubble and curl like burning skin. I didn't try to pry or talk to it, because I realized in that moment that whatever this is, it isn't just a ghost. I mean, I've heard stories about ghosts, and this feels way worse than that. I grabbed the box though, shoved it into a fireproof document bag, and wrapped that thing in so much duct tape that it looked like a silver brick in the end. I'm sitting in my car in a motel parking lot right now, about 10 miles outside of Gary, and I haven't slept in like 30 hours, I think. I really don't know what to do about all this. I mean, like I said, I've never really believed in any of this stuff, and so I have no idea what to do about it. It's part of the reason why I'm here. Do you guys have any idea as to what this could be? And, if so, what can I do about it? My lease doesn't run out for some time yet, and I really don't want to break it, so yeah, do I just live with a demon, or is there something that I can do about it? I don't really share this often, but I honestly just don't know who else to tell this to without people thinking that I'm completely losing my grip. So I took a gig down in Cornwall. It was this tiny, isolated coastal village, dead quiet once the summer tourists cleared out. Just a handful of old-timers left year-round, and this heavy, oppressive atmosphere that felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I was down there doing a long-term photography project on coastal erosion, so I was spending a lot of weird hours out by myself. Now, one day I decided to head down to the harbour. The tide was out, and I wanted to get some shots of the moon reflecting off of the exposed basalt rock. The village, it was completely dead. No cars, no wind, not even gulls, just the sound of my own boots. I was walking along the jetty when I saw him standing down on the slipway, maybe 30 yards ahead. At first I figured that it was a local out late, but then I noticed how massive he was. Easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall, super lean and kind of hunched over in this heavy coat. I stopped though, waiting for him to turn around or say something, but he didn't move an inch. He was just staring straight at a blank vertical cliff face. Then he started moving, and my stomach completely dropped out. He didn't walk. His torso twisted at this impossible, sickening angle, while his feet stayed locked, facing forward. He began sliding sideways, moving like a heavy piece of furniture being shoved across the floor, but his legs were still lifting and dropping in this weird, sort of martial arts style march. It was sort of a half glide and a half stumble, and the weirdest part was that it made zero sound on the wet stone. I slowly turned around upon seeing this, and I started heading back toward the village, keeping my steps as quiet as I could. When I finally risked a look over my shoulder, he had stopped. He was standing completely rigid, but his head was tilted at a 90-degree angle, staring straight up. Under the moonlight, I could see his face and I'd never seen him before. I didn't run until I hit the edge of the village street, and then I sprinted the last half mile to my rented cottage, slammed it, locked it, and dived into bed with the reading lamp buzzing. I thought that I was safe, but then, about 10 minutes later, I heard pacing around the house, moving deliberately from the back toward the front window. I crawled out of bed, keeping way below the windowsill, and dragged myself into the hallway. The sound stopped right outside of my front door. I held my breath, waiting for the wood to splinter or the handle to turn or something. Instead, though, there was this awful, smoker's cough from the other side. I heard it for about maybe a minute, and then whoever was on the other side, they began to walk away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and hours later I finally peeked outside and the street was empty. I really struggled to sleep the rest of the time that I was there. In fact, I ended up at another place eventually because I just couldn't stay there anymore. Still in the local area, but just not in that place. I am convinced, though, that whatever that thing was down on the slipway, it wasn't a person, and it wasn't a ghost either. It moved like it didn't even understand the basic rules of how a body was supposed to work, and it knew pretty damn well that I was watching. I've been living in this rented house on the outskirts for about 8 months now. It's a 1940s bungalow, the kind with the thick, stubborn crown molding and floorboards that groan if you even breathe on them. I'm a night shift nurse, so my internal clock is a bit of a wreck, and I spend a lot of time alone in the quiet hours when the rest of the world is dead to the light. Now, 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in the kitchen around 4 in the morning, waiting for a pot of coffee to brew. The house was completely still when, from the hallway leading to the guest room, I heard the distinctive sound of a heavy heel striking the wood. Not a shuffle, but a deliberate weighted step. Then another one. I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I sat there, my hands wrapped around a cold mug, listening. The footsteps stopped right at the threshold of the kitchen, and I looked up expecting to see my roommate, but the doorway was empty. Then the refrigerator, which hadn't run in 20 minutes, suddenly clicked and kicked into a cycle so loud that it made the floorboards rattle. Now, I've dealt with weird noises since I moved into this place. Door swinging shut, the hallway lights flickering even after I replaced the wiring. It's an old house and I've learned to sort of tune it out, but this felt different. It felt like something had shifted its weight from one foot to another, just inches away from me. Last Sunday, I had my sister over to help me paint the spare room as well. She's the type of person who thinks that horoscopes are a science and is constantly looking for signs of the afterlife. We were taping off the baseboards when she suddenly dropped the brush. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice tight. I looked up from the floor. Who was who? "The guy," she said, pointing toward the hallway. "The one standing there in the tan work jacket. He's huge. Why is he just watching us?" I looked, but there was nothing there, just the empty, shadowed hallway and the smell of the fresh primer. My skin began to crawl, though, upon hearing her say that. I didn't tell her that I'd been seeing glimpses of a man with some bulky, squared-off silhouette in the reflection of the hallway mirror for weeks at this point. So I just stood up and told her that we were finished for the day. I'm currently sitting on the porch watching the sun drop behind the trees, and I'm starting to realize that the house isn't just making noise. It feels occupied. I mean, my sister described him. The jacket, the width of the shoulders, and it matched exactly what I'd seen in the mirror. I have a shift tonight at the hospital, and for the first time in my life, I am genuinely not looking forward to coming home to an empty house. So I grew up in a pretty drafty, split-level house in a suburban lot. My parents were always working, so I spent a lot of afternoons alone reading in the living room or staring out at the woods behind our fence. I never really felt lonely, though even when the house was dead silent, there always was a bit of a weight to the air, a subtle, constant pressure like standing next to a humming power station maybe. When I was 12, I was riding my bike on the gravel shoulder of a busy county road one day, and a delivery van drifted onto the shoulder, clipped my handlebars, and sent me flying. I remember the sound of the metal tearing and the rush of the air before I hit the road, and then I blacked out. When I woke up, I was laying face up in the grass, 20 feet from where the bike was mangled. But I didn't have a scratch on me, not even a bruise. I stood up, confused, and felt a sort of weird static-charged sensation, like my skin was vibrating at a high frequency. I didn't think much of it as well, until last month, that is. You see, I'm 26 now, living in a studio apartment in Chicago, and my younger brother has been staying with me while he looked for work. Things were fine for the first 2 weeks, but then he started losing his temper over, well, really nothing. He'd blame me for his failures, get aggressive, and eventually just sort of storm out. He was in a particularly bad, dark mood one day as well, shouting at me about money. He backed me into the corner of the kitchen, his face inches from mine, looking like he was about to swing, and I was terrified, not for my own safety, but because of the sheer concentrated anger radiating off of him. Then the air in the kitchen suddenly just, well, for a lack of a better term, thickened. It felt like the room had been pressurized. I couldn't move. It wasn't that I was scared, it was that my muscles literally wouldn't obey me. Then I felt 2 massive solid points of pressure on my shoulders, like a heavy coat being draped over me. It forced me to stand perfectly straight, rooting me to the spot. My brother suddenly stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the space right behind my head, his expression shifting from rage to pure confusion. He took a sort of staggered step back, tripped over his own feet, and literally bolted out the front door without grabbing his keys. I must have stayed in that spot for nearly an hour, too. The pressure on my shoulders didn't go away until I finally walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The house is quiet now, but that humming, it's back. It's a low resonant frequency that makes the water in my glass ripple a little bit sometimes. Sometimes too, when I'm standing in a crowded grocery store or walking through a park, I feel that same vibration. It follows me like a shadow that has actual mass to it. It doesn't like people too, and it really doesn't seem to like crowds. I've tried visiting a local church just to see if the building would help me understand what this is, but the moment that I stepped onto the concrete steps, my vision tunneled and a migraine hit me so hard that I had to sit down on the sidewalk, and I haven't been back there. I don't know if this thing is my protector or a jailer or if I'm just going crazy, but it just occupies the space around me and it doesn't seem to have any intention of leaving. I think I'm sort of getting used to it now a bit too. The way the hair on my arm stands up whenever someone with a heavy negative presence walks too close to me. It doesn't feel human, and I don't know if it's a ghost or not, but it feels a bit like an anchor, I guess. And I'm starting to think that I've been tethered to it for, well, quite a long time. So I grew up in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Seattle. My bedroom was honestly barely a closet, just enough space for a twin bed and a plastic milk crate that I used as a nightstand. When I was about 9, I went through a phase where I was sort of obsessed with these cheap glow-in-the-dark plastic figurines that you could win at those claw machines in the grocery store lobbies. I had dozens of them too, little aliens, sea creatures, monsters, all lined up on this crate. Now, one afternoon I found a weird one in the parking lot outside. It was a heavy slate grey thing, shaped like a squatting faceless owl, but the material didn't feel like the usual cheap plastic. It was cold and had this matte, chalky texture to it, so I brought it inside and set it on the very front edge of the crate, right by my pillow. That night, though, I woke up to a sound that was terrifying. There was this scratching sound against the plastic of the crate, and it sounded like something sharp was sort of almost trying to grip the surface or something. I laid there stiff as a board, staring at the crate, but the figurine, it was gone. I could hear something moving, though, actively dragging itself across the wooden floorboards. Whatever it was, it moved toward the closet, each scraping sound that it made terrifying me even more. And eventually, I bolted into the living room and shook my dad awake. He was groggy and annoyed, but he followed me back to my room with a flashlight. We searched for at least an hour as well. We checked under the bed, inside the closet, under pillows, in the linen, and even in my shoes in the hallway, but that figurine was just gone. Mind you, the room was tiny, like I said. I mean, there was literally nowhere for a 2-inch piece of plastic to hide. Anyway, I ended up sleeping in my dad's room that night, and the next day at school, I went to find this kid that I usually traded toys with, to ask if he had ever seen an owl like that before in any collections. But he looked at me with this completely blank, vacant expression. He had no idea what I was talking about. We eventually moved out of that apartment 2 years later, and when we were packing up the last of the junk under my old bed, a bed that hadn't been moved since we had moved in, we found a small circular stain on the floorboard, exactly where I had left that crate. The wood seemed to be bleached white and brittle, as if maybe something had been leaking acid or extremely cold onto it for like years. I don't keep those figurines anymore. In fact, I got rid of them years and years ago. I don't even like things sitting on my nightstand for this reason too. And look, I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I do believe that some things are just not meant to be picked up. And to this day, I don't think that I should have brought that thing home. So I moved into a high-rise apartment a few years back. It was really cheap, which honestly should have been my first warning, but the building, it was basically just a concrete slab that sat right next to an elevated train station. I was living alone. My days were spent working data entry at a desk job, and my nights were spent in perpetual states of hyper-alertness. It started small, like I'd be in the kitchen making tea, and I'd hear someone clear their throat in the living room. I'd walk in, but the space would be empty, just the trains passing by outside from time to time. The real shift happened, though, in March, when I was lying in bed, always with the overhead light on, because the shadows in that place seemed to move independently of the furniture, when I noticed the closet door in the corner of my eye. It was slightly ajar, but I knew that I'd shut it before I got into bed. I watched, breath held, as the door literally swung open another inch, guided by, well, nothing but a soft, steady pulling force. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched as a literal hand just manifested from the darkness, grabbed the edge of the door, and it wasn't human. The fingers were really thin, splayed out a bit like a starfish, and they were the color of a bruised slate. They didn't have nails, just flat, hardened tips that pressed into the wood. I instantly pulled the covers up upon seeing that. My eyes began to water, and I stared at the ceiling under those covers until dawn. That was just the start of it too. For months, whatever this thing was, it stayed in that closet. And then it started moving closer. I would wake up and I would see something hovering over the foot of my bed, a tall, spindly shape that looked like it was made of static. I couldn't perceive a face or anything. It just sort of watched me though, I think, its body sort of pulsing with static. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I was just having sleep deprivation, or the way that the streetlights filtered through the blinds was causing this or something. But then I started hearing voices too. My dad, he died years ago, but I would hear him standing in the hallway, calling my name in a voice that sounded like it was coming through a broken radio. It would garble the syllables a bit, turning my own name into a sound that was similar to like grinding rocks. Last week, though, it finally touched me. So, I was sitting on my couch when I felt a pressure on my hair. It felt like cold, dry silk being dragged through my curls, and I froze, looking at the reflection in the darkened window, and saw that same slate-grey, multi-jointed finger resting on my head. I literally panicked. I couldn't stay. I packed a bag, left the keys on the counter, and checked into a motel on the edge of the city. And I've been here for 3 days now. I haven't slept for more than an hour at a time, and I'm absolutely exhausted. The room is clean and there's no sounds of the trains here, but the silence is, well, kind of worse, really. I find myself sort of jumping at everything. I really don't want to go back, but I'm probably going to have to at some point. I don't have the money to stay here any longer, really, and, well, I'm just here because I want to know what this is and if there's anything that I can do about it. So I recently moved into a pretty drafty third-floor walk-up in Portland last October. It's an old brick building with massive original windows that don't quite lock right, but since I started my new job, my sleep schedule has been pretty erratic, to put it mildly. Last Wednesday, though, I left the bedroom window cracked about 4 inches because the room was sweltering. I was exhausted, passed out face down on the mattress, facing the far wall. Around 3 in the morning, I would say, a sound pulled me out of a deep sleep. It was faint, and I couldn't quite make out what it was at first. I lay there for a second, not knowing what I was listening to, but I was so drained that I just sort of rolled back over and I faded out again. But the next time that I woke up, the room was bathed in this weird flat orange glow from the streetlights, I thought. I felt a compulsion to turn around, and as I rolled into my back, I saw something. Just above the sill, blocking out a sliver of the streetlight, was a head. It was tiny, though, barely the size of a grapefruit, and the skin looked like shriveled, dehydrated leather. I couldn't make anything out more than that, but as my eyes locked onto it, it jerked downward, dropping out of sight below the window line. I instantly sat up, gripping the edge of the blanket. I waited, counting the seconds, but nothing happened. I then forced myself to walk over to the window, shoved it shut, and I locked it. I figured that it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a bird that had landed on the sill. So eventually, after another hour or so, I went back to bed, leaving the light off. Now, I don't know how much time passed before I woke up again, but this time I didn't move. I kept my eyes clamped shut, my hands curled into fists under my pillow, and I waited, testing my limbs. I could move my toes, my neck, my hands, and I was wide awake, so I know that it wasn't sleep paralysis. I opened my eyes and looked toward the corner of the room, past my dresser, and peeking out from the narrow gap between the wardrobe and the bedroom door, that same shriveled dark head was just there, watching me. It was sort of wedged into the shadows, perfectly motionless. But when I shifted my weight, It didn't scurry, it just sort of seemed to fold into the darkness, shrinking until there was nothing left behind the furniture. I literally jumped out of bed and ripped the wardrobe doors open, checking the small crawl space behind it that leads into the wall cavity there. But it was empty. There was nothing but dust and old drywall in there. I'm sitting in my living room now, with every light in the place turned on. I keep glancing back at the bedroom door. I don't know if this is some kind of stress-induced breakdown or if I've actually let something into the apartment that doesn't belong here at all, but I know one thing. I'm not going back into that room tonight, or perhaps ever really. In fact, I think I'm going to go and stay with a friend for at least a few days. Back when I was in 7th grade, my parents went through a pretty nasty separation. I ended up spending every other weekend at my dad's new place, a cramped wood-paneled rental. The house, though, had an unfinished basement that ran the entire length of the structure. My dad used it as a storage space for all of the boxes from his old life. He told me, though, to never go down there, claiming that the stairs were loose and the wiring has a fire hazard or something, but I was 12 and I was bored. And so, whenever he was asleep, I would sneak down there to mess around with an old Polaroid camera that I'd found in one of the crates down there. The 6-year-old daughter of my dad's girlfriend lived there too, and she was always a bit of a strange kid. Quiet and always staring at things that just weren't there. She spent hours sitting at the top of the basement stairs, for instance, whispering to the darkness, claiming that she was talking to a tall brother who lived behind the furnace. One Tuesday at around 5 in the morning, I was sitting in the living room trying to keep quiet so that I wouldn't wake anyone up. I was looking through the photos that I'd snapped in the basement the night before. I had a clear shot of the work table, the concrete floor, and the narrow coal chute in the far corner. And in the developed photo, standing directly behind the workbench, was a man. He was wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 20s, a heavy wool coat and a flat cap. His face was tilted away from the lens, but his hand was resting on the workbench. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. I looked up and saw the little girl standing in the hallway watching me. She didn't look scared. She pointed a small, steady finger toward the basement door and said, "He's cold. You shouldn't have turned the light on." And that was the night that the knocking officially started. It wasn't on the front door. It was coming from inside the walls of my bedroom. It was a frantic tapping that traveled all around the baseboards and up to the ceiling, mimicking the sound of somebody walking on the joists above my head. But there was no attic up there, just a steep pitched roof with no crawl space. I couldn't really sleep anymore because every time that I closed my eyes, I heard that same clicking sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. One night, though, I worked up the courage to shove my dresser against the basement door, and when I woke up the next morning, the dresser, it had been moved back 3 feet at least, leaving deep, jagged gouges in the hardwood floor that I was in a lot of trouble for. I never touched the Polaroid camera after that ever again. I didn't even pack it away. I left it sitting on the coffee table when my mum finally came to pick me up for good. I don't ask people about their kids' imaginary friends anymore. Some things are certainly a product of an active imagination, but I'm convinced now more than ever that that isn't always the case. I've always been someone who notices the fine details. I'm sort of hyper-observant, I guess you could say, which is why I know that what I saw in my own house wasn't a trick of the light or a lapse in my memory or something like that. So, I bought a detached cottage. It's in an isolated spot, surrounded by low stone walls and dense gorse. For the first few months, I was working long hours as well, often coming home well after dark. I'd been sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing data, when I'd get the distinct feeling that I just wasn't alone. it wasn't the kind of unease that you get from hearing a floorboard creak or something like that. It was that distinct feeling of being watched from like 3 feet away. And then the mimicry started. So I was in the garage working on a transmission line for my equipment when I heard my own voice come from the house. It wasn't a recording, it was me, tone and all, shouting, "Are you coming in?" from the mudroom. I called back in a minute and finished my work, and I walked inside. The house was completely empty. My partner, who I live with, was still at her studio across town, and I assumed that it was her at first. I walked through every room, though, checking the locks, and everything was secure. Now, a week later, I woke up at about 3 in the morning to the sound of my partner whispering my name in my ear. I rolled over to touch her shoulder, but her side of the bed was cold and vacant. She had been at a conference for at least 2 days, and I laid there, rigid, listening to the silence of the room when a low, sort of raspy voice came from the corner of the ceiling. A sound that started as my own voice, but then distorted into something jagged, like metal being scraped against stone. It didn't just mimic us, though. It seemed to be learning how to occupy our spaces almost. Like one evening, my partner came home early, pale and shaking, and she told me that she'd been sitting in the living room when she heard me walk down the stairs, walk into the kitchen, and open the fridge. She called out my name, but the person who walked back out wasn't me. It was a silhouette of me, but walking strangely. She didn't stay to get a good look at it. She ran out the front door and sat in her car until I got home. I decided to set up a field camera. It was a part of some high-resolution gear that I was using at the time, and I set it up in the hallway. The next morning, I pulled the footage, and the screen showed the hallway at 4 in the morning. A shadow emerged from the guest room, a dense, oily-looking blur that had no depth to it, and it moved toward the kitchen, and as it passed the camera, it didn't just walk, it sort of flickered. From one frame to another, it was a mass of shifting dark geometry. Then it stopped and seemed to almost look directly into the lens, and I swear to you that I saw a pair of eyes. Just 2 pale circular depressions that seemed to pull the light right out of the room almost. I called a local man who does property clearings, mostly to keep my partner from moving out, to be honest. He spent an hour walking the perimeter, not with incense or prayers, but with a thermal scanner. He looked at me too, dead seriously, and told me to just get rid of the house. He said that the ground wasn't right, that the cottage was built on a seam in the rock that didn't hold energy but invited it to bleed through. I haven't gone back since then, too. We're currently renting in the city, but the habit of checking the place before I go to sleep is something I just cannot shake anymore. I'm thankful that nothing has happened since we've moved here, but still, I really don't know what to do with that old place. Do you guys think that I should just sell it and get rid of it? Is it even ethical to do so, or should I try to do something about this? What do you guys think? So I grew up in one of those places that felt like it was stitched together from like 3 different generations of bad DIY projects. Sagging walls, mismatched wallpaper, you name it. But because my parents were always juggling debt too, my younger brother and I spent most of our childhood sleeping on 2 mismatched pull-out sofas in the den. Now, it wasn't a gift or anything dramatic like that. It was just this constant grinding reality that I always had with me. I would wake up at night, my eyes snapping open to the absolute darkness of the room, and there would be someone there. It wasn't a shadow, it was a person, standing. I remember a man in a heavy grease-stained denim jacket, his face etched with deep vertical lines that looked like scars. He'd stand with his back to me, perfectly still, his shoulders hunched as if he were waiting for a bus that was never coming. I'd spend 10 minutes staring at the back of his neck, picking out the coarse salt and pepper hair, convincing myself that it was just my dad's work coat hanging on the nearby wall. But then, the man would turn. He would rotate his head until he was looking directly at me, his eyes pale, flat, and devoid of any life. I'd shut my eyes so hard that it gave me a headache a few times, and I'd count to 100, my breath short in my throat, waiting for the feeling of being observed to finally leave. And when I opened them, the room was always empty. There was a woman, too. She appeared near the kitchen threshold at least twice a week. She was always dressed in a thin, worn-out nightdress, her stomach distended as if she were in the late stages of pregnancy. She never looked at me, though. She would just stare down at a pair of invisible hands that I could never see, her shoulders shaking in silent, jagged rhythm. I didn't tell anyone for years about this, too. I figured that I was just broken, that my brain was misfiring in the dark. It wasn't until I was about 19 and sitting in a Denny's with my brother that it all finally clicked. You see, we were talking about how much we both hated our childhood home, and he looked down at his coffee and asked, "Did you ever see the guy in the denim jacket, the one who used to stand in our room?" The blood instantly drained out of my face so quickly that I genuinely felt lightheaded. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, and said, "And the woman? She was always crying, right? She looked like she was losing a baby or something." We didn't finish the coffee. We sat in the parking lot in silence for probably 15 minutes, terrified to say any more, as if saying the words out loud would somehow anchor those things into reality for us. We're both in our mid-20s now and living in different states. I have a normal life and even a family now, but I still have trouble sleeping in the dark sometimes. In fact, I keep a lamp on my nightstand for this reason. I guess I'm still worried that if I let the room get too dim, that I'll wake up at night like I used to and see something standing there, waiting for me to turn my head. Back in 2022, I was house-sitting for my cousin while she and her husband were on a week-long cruise. It was an older building, thin floors, original brass hardware, and it wasn't too bad. I was 19 at the time, and the place felt way too big for just me and their 2 rescued greyhounds. The dogs, they were always skittish, the kind that would growl at shadows if the light hit them wrong. But they were pretty good company, I suppose, usually huddled together at the foot of the master bed. Anyway, it was a Tuesday night, about 11 p.m, and I just turned off the lamp and was lying there with my girlfriend, both of us scrolling through our phones. The bedroom door was shut to stop the dogs from wandering into the hallway, and the sound, it started as just these dull thuds, like somebody hitting the door, but then it escalated. The entire door frame shuddered. The wood was literally groaning under the force of it. It genuinely sounded like a grown man was throwing his entire weight against the frame by the end of it, trying to splinter the latch open. I didn't even think to get up. I literally just lunged for the door, my shoulder slamming against it to hold it shut. My girlfriend was right behind me, pushing with everything that she had too, both of us hyperventilating. We held it for a full minute, waiting for the door to cave in, but the pressure on the other side just stopped. We ended up calling the police after shoving the dresser in front of the door, and we waited until they arrived. I didn't sleep that night, and the police showed up, but there was no one there. The weirdest part, though, was that those dogs, they would bark if so much as a leaf blew against the glass, but they hadn't let out a single whine at all the entire time that was going on. When the sun rose the next morning, I checked the entire apartment, too. The locks on the front door were still set, the balcony door was locked, the alarm system was still on, which I had checked 3 times before bed, and was still showing the status as armed. I contacted my cousin as well, who was always into some strange stuff, like crystal grids, burning sage, weird journals that she kept tucked away in the back of her closet. She once told me that she bought a set of unique bedroom furniture from an estate sale that had trapped energy in the wood, but I'd always brushed it off as just her being dramatic or whatever. But after that night, I didn't stay in that bedroom again. I spoke to her about it, and she told me that I needed to get out of that house as quickly as I could. So I dragged a mattress into the kitchen, and I slept under the light of the aisle until the owners got back. I never did mention it to them. I just handed over the keys, grabbed my stuff, and I drove home. I actually broke up with my girlfriend at the time, who was there that night, but we're still on good terms, and sometimes we still talk about that night, and every time that I do, I always just feel a cold tingle go down my spine. I grew up in a sprawling cedar shingle farmhouse that had been in my family for like 4 generations at this point. The property was isolated too, miles of dense pine forest on 3 sides and jagged rocky creeks on the 4th. But because my parents were always working as well, I spent an unhealthy amount of time alone. But the house, it had a bit of a peculiar layout. It was built into the side of a steep incline, meaning that the back half of the lower floor was partially sort of buried against the earth, leaving it perpetually damp and dark. My bedroom was down there too. It was a windowless, concrete-walled space that stayed ice cold even in the middle of July. When I was about 16, I had a friend named Sarah staying over. We were sitting on my bed late one night, whispering because my stepfather was notorious for flying into rages if he caught us awake past midnight. The house, though, was a total dead zone for cell service, so the only place that you could get a signal was by crawling through a narrow gap between the bed and the rear wall, right near the utility closet. We were crouched into that tight space, our faces illuminated by the blue glow of our phones, when I looked up. The utility closet door was slightly ajar, and standing in the darkness inside was something, or someone. I think it was a man who was over 6 feet tall, and he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, silhouetted against the dim light filtering in from the hallway. I sort of shoved Sarah, and we scrambled across the floor, bolted out of the room, and slammed the door shut, locking it from the outside. I was absolutely panicking at that point, that sharp, sickening adrenaline spiking that makes your vision sort of grey out at the edges. A few seconds later, I saw a sliver of light appear under the door. My stepfather had finally gotten home. I turned to Sarah, trembling, and said, "He's home." She looked at me, her face pale, and whispered, "That wasn't him. That person was way too tall." My stepfather was like 5'8". We stayed there for hours, just not knowing what to do, but eventually we went back to bed and we went to sleep. That wasn't the only time that the house felt wrong, too. I mean, I spent years staring into the long, narrow hallway that connected my room to the kitchen, and because of the way that the floorboards had settled there was barely 2 inches of clearance between the doorway and the frame. Yet, night after night, I would see movement, a shape leaning out from the kitchen, seemingly trying to sort of look into my room. Every time that I'd whip my head around to look directly at it, the hallway would be empty though, the shadows just pooling quietly on the floor. I told myself that it must just be like me seeing things in my peripheral vision or whatever, but the sensation of being like tracked was really heavy, way too heavy to be a hallucination. The last thing that happened though before I left for college, it still doesn't sit right with me. I was cooking dinner alone, watching my rescue terrier, Buster. He was a brave, stubborn dog who never even flinched at thunder or fireworks. But that evening, he stopped eating. He backed into the corner of the kitchen, his hackles raised so high that they looked like a ridge of wire, and he let out a growl toward the front door. He wasn't just barking, too. He was rigid, his paws locked in place as if he were guarding me from something that only he could see. I grabbed my phone to record him, but the screen glitched, flashing black and white, and the touch response died. I then began to taste something like blood in the air, and I felt a sudden violent drop in the temperature. Buster and I ended up running out of there, and, well, we didn't go back in there until my parents got home. I left for college about 2 months later, and I never looked back. My parents divorced shortly afterward, and the house was sold off to some developers. I sometimes wonder, though, if that figure is still around that place or not, waiting for somebody else to look at it from the corner of their eye like I used to. I don't own a house at all. I rent an apartment on the 4th floor of a brick building in the city. I don't like basements, and I certainly don't like long hallways after all of that. And I keep my dog close to me whenever the house goes quiet, too. I will never forget those days, and those nights, too, for as long as I live. I was 26, living in a cramped studio in a college town in Northern California, and my bank account was perpetually sitting in the double digits. I was working 2 retail jobs and still barely scraping rent. Someone mentioned one of those arrangement sites, sugar dating or whatever, and in a moment of pure stressed-out stupidity, I signed up. I talked to a guy on there for a few days. He seemed normal enough to me. Maybe a bit too eager to be supportive, but we agreed to meet at a regional park in the Sierra for a hike, and I told myself that it was fine. Daylight, public space, clear visibility, all that. I sent his profile and the GPS coordinates to my sister, and told her to call the cops if she didn't hear from me by 8 p.m, and drove up. The park was a disaster, though. It wasn't a trailhead at all. It was this weird, overgrown patch of scrubland at the end of a long, unpaved logging road. No other cars, no hikers, just a rusted-out pickup parked sideways across the track. The guy was already leaning against it. He looked nothing like his photos. He was gaunt, his skin had this greyish, translucent cast to it, and he was covered in what looked like heavy construction dust, too. He didn't greet me, just nodded toward the woods, and I immediately felt the shift. It wasn't nervousness. It was the feeling that you get when you realize that you've walked into like an ambush. I should have stayed in the car, I know that, but instead I followed him. We hiked for about 20 minutes, and he started talking. At first it was standard small talk too, but then it just veered straight off the edge. He started detailing his life, or what he claimed was his life. He talked about his first wife, how he'd found her after a domestic accident that the police never solved, and then about a girlfriend who had vanished during a weekend trip that they'd taken to these very woods years back. Every word made the hair on my arm stand up, and I don't think that I was listening to a story. I think that I was listening to a confession. I managed to steer the conversation toward the car, though, pretending that I had a migraine, and when we got back to the clearing, he didn't head for the driver's side. He stood right between me and my car door, watching me with these flat, unblinking eyes. He was so cold that it was scary. He pulled a heavy, tarnished folding knife from his pocket, not to threaten me, but just to clean his fingers. "You know," he said, staring at the blade, "it's so quiet out here. You can scream for an hour and nobody's going to hear a thing." My phone was in my pocket. I blindly tapped the SOS shortcut that I'd set up, praying that it would bypass the lock screen and send the ping to my sister. I stood there, forcing myself to look him in the eye, nodding like he was telling me a joke. "I really have to get back," I said, my voice sounding thin even in my own ears. "My roommate has an emergency. I just saw the notification." He didn't move for a long 5 seconds. The silence was heavy and awkward. Finally, though, he gave a slow, jagged shrug and stepped aside. I didn't wait for him to move again. I got into the car, locked the doors, and reversed as fast as I could, and even clipped a tree trunk on the way out. I drove down the logging road, doing 50, not looking into the rearview mirror until I hit the paved state highway. When I finally got back to my apartment, I logged into the site to delete my account, and I had one new message from him. It was a simple line: "You're a terrible listener, but you have a beautiful car. I hope your roommate is doing better." I moved out of that studio not long after this, and I never saw him again. But for months I was looking over my shoulder everywhere I went because I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with that guy. Something terribly wrong. I was about 9 years old, and my family used to drive out every other weekend to stay at my uncle's place in a tiny town in rural Kentucky. It was the kind of place where you didn't lock your doors and you could run around until the streetlights flickered on. One July evening, my cousins were obsessed with these cheap sparklers that we'd seen at a local gas station. I really wanted to be a part of the group too, so I begged my dad for a few dollars. He didn't ask why, just handed me a $5, and my cousin told me the gas station in town was sold out, so I had to walk to the outer one, the one sitting right on the edge of the county road, about a mile from the town limits. I hated that walk too. It was just dense woods and highway on either side, so no streetlights and absolutely zero foot traffic. The trip to the store was fine though. I grabbed the sparklers and a pack of gum, shoved them in my pockets, and started the trek back up the shoulder of the highway. About 5 minutes in though, I heard the faint whirring of tires on the gravel behind me. A guy on an old mountain bike was coasting along the edge of the road, keeping pace with my walking speed. I figured that he was just heading into town, but the way that he was riding was sort of wrong. He wasn't looking at the road ahead. He was staring straight at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. Suddenly, I felt a bit weird about this. I picked up my pace, and he matched it instantly. Then a low rumble started up. A beat-up, dark blue sedan pulled up on the other side of the road, matching our speed perfectly. The driver was leaning over, eyes glued to me, driving at a crawl. It hit me then that the bike guy was flanking me on the right, and the car was boxing me in on the left. The guy on the bike suddenly swerved closer, leaning toward me and dangling a long, thin hand out. His voice was flat and bored, almost like he was reciting a line that he practiced 100 times. "Hey kid, want some sweets? I've got bags of them in the back." The moment that he said sweets, the memory of my mother's warnings about the van men that everyone in our neighborhood talked about hit me like a physical blow. I didn't think, I just bolted. I sprinted toward a narrow drainage ditch that ran along the woods, and I could hear the bike skidding as the guy tried to turn hard, and the car's engine revved as the driver tried to cut across the shoulder to head me off. They were trying to funnel me somewhere, to drive me off the pavement and into the dark tree line where they could just pull me into the back of the car, I think. I lunged into the brush, my sneakers sliding on the loose mud, and I scrambled up the steep embankment that led back to the main town hill. The bike couldn't climb the slope, thankfully, and the car couldn't follow me into the ditch. I heard the car door slam, but I was already crashing through the undergrowth, scraping my arm raw on thorns, not daring to look back. I burst out of the trees, right onto the main street of the town. I was a complete mess, too, breathing and crying and sweating, but the second that I saw my cousins playing by the park, the terror just suddenly vanished and hope was there. And I remember at the time it feeling a bit like I'd been playing a game of tag that had just ended. I never did tell my parents. I didn't tell a police officer or a sheriff or anything. I just walked over to my cousins, pulled out the sparklers, and I started lighting them like nothing had happened. It wasn't until I was an adult that the memory started coming back in pieces, how calculated they were, how perfectly they worked together, and how lucky I was that I chose the ditch over the road that day. I still don't talk about it much because I hate to think about what might have happened. A few years ago, I took a temporary contract job in a remote, high-desert town in eastern Utah. I was staying in a pretty small, converted shipping container turned into a studio apartment. It was perched on the edge of a private ranch, about 3 miles from the nearest paved road. Because the canyon was so deep and far from the grid, the silence at night wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like a physical weight pressing against the corrugated metal walls. I was a heavy sleeper, but one night at 2 in the morning, the vibration of the door slammed me awake. It wasn't a casual knock. It was 3 thunderous, deliberate booms that made the entire container shiver on its cinder block foundation. My heart immediately hit my throat. I sat bolt upright, staring at the door. Right on the other side of the metal, I then heard a voice. It sounded exactly like the ranch owner calling my name, telling me to open and come outside right now. There was no sound of a truck idling, though. No gravel crunching and no footsteps on the wooden porch. It was just absolute vacuum silence surrounding the metallic thudding still ringing in my ears. I sat there for a long minute, paralyzed. I eventually crept to the window near the door and peered through the blinds. When I did, there was nobody there. The yard was void of black sagebrush and moonlight, and I tried calling the ranch owner's cell number 3 times, but it went straight to dead-air voicemail. I was sort of spiraling, to be honest, so I dialed a colleague who had lived in the county for like 20 years at this point. When I whispered what had happened, the line went dead silent. The way that he hesitated wasn't dismissive too. It was cautious, almost fearful. He told me that he knew exactly where that container sat. He'd spent years hiking the canyon passes with local ranchers who worked the deep sections of the Bureau of Land Management Territory or something like that. And he said that most of the weird noises in the canyon were just wind or coyotes, but he'd met men who had lived on the land their entire lives, people who didn't really rattle easily, who refused to hike those specific ridges after sunset. He told me point blank that I needed to stop talking about it, don't mention it by name, and get out of the container by sunrise. He didn't have to explain what he meant. I heard the whispers about the ones who walk in the region, entities that could mimic voices and lure people into the dark. I didn't sleep a wink that night. At dawn, I walked up to the main house and I asked the owner if they'd come by my place at 2 in the morning to get me. They looked at me, their face completely serious, and said, "I haven't been out of my house since yesterday afternoon." When I told them about the knocking and the mimicry, they didn't laugh too. They just turned pale, looked out toward the cliffs, and told me to pack my things and go. They mentioned that the canyon system was connected to old, unmapped ceremonial sites, and that whatever was out there, it was apparently territorial. I stayed in the main house for 2 nights after that, but every time that the wind hit the exterior metal siding, I felt that same primal sort of panic hit me. I broke my contract, packed my truck, and I drove out of that canyon before the week was up. I still don't really talk about that night to anyone but the people who were there, and I guess that some things in the high desert are just better left unnamed. Back in the winter of 2021, I was subletting a room in a drafty old apartment complex in St. Paul, Minnesota. The building was one of those sort of sprawling brick U-shaped things with a central courtyard that nobody ever used because the heating vents in the hallways rattled like chains all the time. My bedroom window faced the inner courtyard, which was usually pitch black once the sun set down at like 4:30. I'd been there for about 3 months at this point. And for the most part, it was just the usual city noises. Distant sirens, the muffled bass of somebody's stereo sometimes, that sort of thing. Anyway, one Tuesday at around 1 in the morning, I was sitting up in bed reading when I heard a sort of thumping against the brickwork of the courtyard wall. It sounded like somebody throwing a ball against the wall or something. But then there was a pause. Then it was there again, but higher up, like whatever it was had sort of drifted and shifted its weight a bit. I pulled back the curtain an inch. The courtyard was a well of shadows, but the motion sensor light near the emergency exit flickered on for a moment, And that's when I noticed a figure was pressed against the brick, but 12 feet off the ground. It wasn't climbing with like a ladder or anything like that. It sort of looked like it was stuck there. Its limbs, or whatever they were, splayed out in a way that sort of defied gravity. It was wearing dark, nondescript clothing that looked like it had been soaked in oil or something. I didn't yell. I couldn't, because I was sort of paralyzed. I just watched it as this thing peeled itself off the wall. It didn't fall, though. It drifted downward, its movements segmented and jagged. When it reached the ground, it didn't leave tracks. It just sort of stood there, facing my window. But the weirdest thing is that it didn't really have a face. Where the features should have been, there was just a smooth, pale depression in the skin, almost like a plastic mask that had been melted. I dove away from the window and crawled into my closet, pulling the door shut. I sat there in the dark with my phone, my hand shaking so hard that I dropped it twice trying to dial 911. When I finally got the line open, I whispered my address, but the line went suddenly dead. Not a dropped call, but it was like my phone just died all of a sudden. I stayed in that closet until morning. When I finally emerged, the courtyard was empty. There were no footprints, no marks on the brick, just the frozen, lifeless quiet of a Minnesota morning. I moved out soon after this. I didn't tell the building manager why. I just told him that the heating was too inconsistent. I never went back for my security deposit too, and I never walked past that building again. I've lived in 3 different cities since then too, and since then I have a strict rule. I never rent a ground floor apartment if I can help it, and I don't ever look out the window if I hear something hitting the exterior walls. I still don't know what that thing was, but I'll never forget it. So I live in a small, older apartment building in central Denver. My unit is on the ground floor, and my bedroom wall shares a boundary with the building's communal boiler room. It's a pretty old building, so you can hear almost everything that happens in the mechanical space. The pipes clanking, the water pump cycling on and off, that kind of thing. I was tossing and turning for like hours at this point because I couldn't sleep. The boiler room was making the frantic metallic scratching noise, like somebody was raking heavy tools across the internal pipes. I assumed the system was having a breakdown again, but then the scratching stopped all of a sudden and was replaced by something else. It sounded like somebody bumping their shoulder repeatedly against the common wall. It was low, deliberate, and happening right behind my headboard. I sat up, my heart doing a weird flutter. I listened for a good minute, expecting to hear the maintenance guy or maybe a neighbor complaining about the heat. But there was nothing. Just that impact. Just that really weird sound. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out into the hallway to check the boiler room door myself. It's supposed to be permanently padlocked, but as I rounded the corner, I saw that the door was hanging slightly ajar. I didn't step inside. I just shined my light through the crack a bit. The room was empty, just the tangle of rusted iron pipes and the massive groaning water heater like usual. But sitting on the concrete floor, right where the pipework met the wall that backed onto my bedroom, was a pile of small silver screws. It looked like they'd been unscrewed from the wall plate that covers the electrical access panel, my unit's primary junction box. My stomach turned a bit at seeing that. I realized that something was wrong. Someone hadn't been fixing the boiler. They seemed to be trying to bypass the electrical line that controlled the smart lock on my front door, maybe. I slammed the boiler room door shut. I went back into my place and hauled a heavy bookshelf in front of it, so hold it closed. And I went back to my room to call the police. By the time that they had arrived, maybe 10 minutes later, the boiler room was locked solid again. The screws were back in the wall plate, perfectly tightened, and the junction box was untouched. The officers looked at me as if I was crazy. They checked the lock on the boiler room door and found that it was perfectly secure. I don't know how that's even possible, to be honest. And I didn't feel safe knowing that somebody had the tools and the time to fiddle with the wiring to my own apartment. I left about 2 weeks later after this, and to this day I cannot explain how they got in and out without leaving a trace or being seen, or why they were so meticulous about putting everything back exactly the way that they found it. I don't think that it was a burglary attempt, but I don't know. What do you guys think it was? So I was house sitting for a friend in a third-floor walk-up in Chicago last November. My friend's toddler was napping in the bedroom, and I was in the kitchen fixing a sandwich when the buzzer for the front entry went off. I didn't think too much of it, probably a delivery person or something. I didn't bother with the intercom, just walked to the apartment door and looked through the peephole. There was a guy standing in the hallway, maybe in his 60s I would guess. He was wearing a heavy mustard-colored wool coat that looked about 3 sizes too big for him. He wasn't looking at the door though. He was staring directly at the ceiling, his mouth pulled back into a wide, stiff grin that didn't reach his eyes. His arms were hanging straight at his sides, but his fingers were twitching, curling and uncurling against his thighs. I felt the air in the hall seemed to suck the heat out of the space around me. I didn't say anything, just backed away from the door. I waited. He didn't knock. He just stood there for a full minute, that dead-eyed grin fixed on the light fixture above the door. Then, without a sound, he just turned and walked toward the stairs. I called my friend and she picked up the phone on the second ring. When I described the guy, the mustard coat, the twitching hands, she went silent. She told me to lock the door and the chain and to stay away from the windows. She said that she had had a guy like that show up at her office downtown earlier that day apparently, and he had just stood in the lobby staring at the receptionist doing the exact same twitching motion with his fingers. He hadn't said a word to anyone, just stood there for 3 hours until security escorted him out. I stayed on the floor of the hallway with the lights off, watching the sliver of space under the apartment door. About 10 minutes later, I heard somebody's boots on the stairs again. He didn't stop at the apartment this time, though. He kept going up to the 4th floor, and I heard the door to the roof access creak open. It's an old door that sticks and screams on its hinges. You can tell it's that door from a mile away. And then, silence. I called the police, but by the time that they got there, the roof was empty. No footprints, no mustard coat, nothing. The officer checked the roof access, but the door was locked from the inside, just like it had been all along. I never did finish that house-sitting gig in the end. I packed my bag while the cops were still in the hallway and went straight to a hotel. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but the look on his face, that absolute hollow emptiness, is something that I still see when I'm trying to fall asleep sometimes. It wasn't a person trying to get in or anything. It felt like he was marking the place almost, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to, perhaps, open the door. This happened back in the summer of 2022. I was driving home from a late-night shift at a restaurant in suburban Ohio. It was pretty early in the morning, and I had taken a shortcut, a narrow 2-lane road that winds through a stretch of unlit cornfields. It's the kind of route where your headlights are the only thing separating you from the ditch, and I was cruising along at maybe 45 miles per hour when a bicycle wheel caught the edge of my beam. It was lying in the middle of the road, bent at a really weird angle. I literally slammed on the brakes, gravel spraying everywhere as the car skidded to a halt. And my first thought was that it must have been a hit and run. So I stopped the engine and stepped out. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing but the sound of crickets. I walked toward the bike, but then I heard something. Somebody wheezing coming from the cornrows about maybe 10 feet away. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, stumbled out of the stalks. He was wearing a dark hoodie and sweatpants. He was trembling so hard that his teeth were actually chattering, and he kept looking over his shoulder into the blackness of the field. He didn't look at me. He was just staring at the road behind me. "You have to go," he whispered. His voice was raw, like he'd been screaming for hours. It didn't like the bike, and it broke it. I started to reach for my phone to call for some help, but he lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. His skin was freezing, like he'd been submerged in ice water. "No phones," he hissed. "It hears the signal. It's already close." I pulled my arm back, my skin crawling at the sensation. I looked at the bike, then back at him. "Hey, listen, you're safe now. Just come to the car and we'll get you to a hospital." He didn't move. He just pointed at the corn. I squinted, trying to pierce through the darkness. I saw something shift. Not a person, but like a ripple in the stalks, like a massive animal moving through the rows. Whatever it was tall enough to brush the tops of the corn, about 7 feet off the ground, I would say. "It's not a person," the kid whispered, finally looking at me. His eyes were so bloodshot, pupils blown out to the size of dimes. "It's been following me since the creek." I didn't wait. I didn't care about the bike or the explanation. I shoved the kid toward the passenger door, threw myself into the driver's seat, and peeled out of there, spinning the tires on the gravel. I drove for 10 miles without saying a word, the kid staring out of the back window the entire time. Eventually, after all of his complaining, I dropped him off at a gas station that had a security camera and 24/7 staff, figuring that he'd be safe there, and I told them to call the police or some emergency services or something. I never did get his name, and he never thanked me either. He just hopped out, walked into the store, and vanished behind the chip aisle. I went home that day, and I was so confused and just traumatized by the whole thing that I didn't really sleep for about 2 days. I've gone back to that road a couple of times since then, mostly out of a sort of morbid curiosity, I guess you could say, but I never do actually stop. I don't drive that route anymore at night, and I keep thinking about what that kid said, about it not liking the bike and how it knew when I was trying to use my phone. I don't know. Maybe the kid was hallucinating, and maybe he just needed help, and maybe there was somebody out there in the stalks, but whatever the case, I'm just really glad that I got out of there with that kid when I did. So I was staying at my aunt's place in rural Georgia for a few weeks to help her out after some surgery. It was a few years back, and the house was an old, sprawling farmhouse, set back about a quarter mile from the main road, surrounded by nothing but dense pine forest and tall overgrown grass. My bedroom was in the back corner of the house, facing a thick line of trees. It was a quiet place, too, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little bit. One night, really early in the morning, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard something. It was somebody hitting the side of the house with like an open palm, moving slowly from the corner of the house toward my window. I instantly sat up, the floorboards now cold under my feet. My aunt was in the front room of the house, fast asleep and hard of hearing, so I knew that I was the only one awake. I didn't turn on the lamp at first. Instead, I crept to the window and peeled the curtain back just a fraction. I then noticed that the motion sensor light on the back porch, it had been unscrewed. The bulb was dangling by a few threads of copper wire, and in the moonlight, I saw him. He was hunched over, pressing his face directly against the glass, his hand splayed against the frame. He was wearing some kind of heavy industrial gear that looked slick and dark, and it looked like he'd been crawling through wet mud, maybe. I didn't say anything. I just sort of fell backward, my heel catching on the rug, and scrambled toward the door. I ran into the living room and shook my aunt awake. She was groggy, confused, but she saw the look on my face and reached for the heavy iron poker that she kept on the hearth. Before we could even move, the back door, which I had locked myself at 11 o'clock, began to really vibrate. Somebody was shaking on it and pounding on it so hard, clearly trying to get in, that I am genuinely shocked that that thing held. My aunt, though, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the landline and dialed 911, her voice tight and steady. I stood in the hallway with the poker staring at the door, not knowing what to do. The glass pane in the center of the door began to spiderweb, long cracks blooming outward from the center of the impact. This guy was now going to town on the safety glass. He was inside within seconds, but the door, it didn't just open, it literally splintered everywhere. He didn't look like a person at first. He was gaunt, his skin pulled so tight over his cheekbones that it looked like it would rip. He was holding a sharpened crowbar, though, and when he saw us, the two of us standing in the hallway, he didn't charge. He just sort of stood there, swaying slightly, and started to hum. I don't know what this guy was doing, but he looked like a complete junkie. My aunt leveled the phone at him, then threw the heavy brass lamp from the end table. It hit him square in the shoulder and he dropped the crowbar. He didn't even flinch, though. He just kept humming, his eyes locked onto mine with a kind of hungry, detached curiosity that made my skin feel like it was crawling off of my body. We didn't wait to see what he would do next, though. We bolted for the front door and straight into the woods. We stayed there too, huddled in the damp brush, listening to him moving through the house and doing whatever he was doing. Mind you, he never did steal anything. Instead, he was throwing things. The sounds of plates shattering, furniture being turned over, the refrigerator literally crashing to the floor. When the sheriff's deputy finally arrived 20 minutes later, the house was silent and they found the place absolutely trashed. The back door was kicked off of its hinges, but the house, it was empty. They tracked him, though, for about a mile into the woods, but apparently, though, he just sort of vanished at the creek line. They never did catch him. A week later, though, we found his prints in the mud by the porch. He'd been wearing boots with no tread, apparently, completely smooth soles. The sheriff told us that it looked like he'd been living in the nearby ravine for weeks, watching the house, waiting for the right night to test the locks, is what he guessed. Again, though, they never did catch the guy. My aunt sold the farmhouse about 2 months later, and even now, all these years later, whenever I think about that night, I really just feel ill. In the late summer of 2025, I was working as a seasonal fire lookout in a remote part of the country. My job was simple: live in a glass-walled tower atop a peak, scan for smoke, and stay out of the way. I'd been up there for about 3 months, I would say. It's a pretty solitary life too, but the pay was really good, and the view was incredible. By September, the tourists were long gone and the snow started to dust the higher ridges too. One day I was looking through the high-powered binoculars that I had toward a drainage basin, maybe about 5 miles east, and I saw something that didn't really fit. Near a dried-up creek bed, there was a bright neon-orange tarp pegged to the ground. That wasn't completely unusual, I guess. Hikers do drop gear all the time, but the way that it was laid out was strange. It was pinned in a perfect rigid square, and from what I could see, there was nobody there. I watched it through the binoculars for at least an hour, but nothing and nobody moved. Anyway, around midnight, I was lying in my cot, the radio chirping with the occasional weather update, and I heard a sound directly underneath the catwalk. It was a metal scraping sound, like somebody dragging a heavy chain across the support beams. I sat up. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down, thinking that maybe an animal had somehow got up or something like that. But the catwalk was empty. But then it sounded as if somebody was coming up the iron ladder leading up to the platform. And mind you, it wasn't a person. The footsteps were too heavy and way too staggered. It sounded like something with 4 legs almost, but the gate was all wrong. Each step hit the metal with a sort of hollow booming sound that rattled the glass panes of the tower even. I didn't have a weapon, just a heavy signal flare, so I grabbed it, ripped the safety pin and waited. The footsteps, they reached the top of the landing too. And that's when I noticed a pale appendage, thinner than a normal arm, sort of curled around the doorframe. It was so white as well that it looked bleached. It didn't have any fingers, and it just tapered off into a blunt sort of rounded knob. It didn't try to open the door or anything, it just pressed its weight against the glass, and then the pane sort of groaned underneath its pressure, and I could see a reflection of something in the dark glass, but I couldn't make out exactly what it was. I began to panic. I didn't reach for the radio, and instead I just sort of stared, my heart absolutely hammering in my throat. I held the flare out, my hand shaking so hard that the casing was rattling. I didn't shoot it though, I just stood there, motionless, praying that that latch would not open. For 10 minutes too, whatever was out there stayed there. But the smell was the absolute worst part of it. It smelled like sulfur, and it was absolutely horrendous. Then, all of a sudden, I heard this thing's weight shift. It moved back to the ladder, and I heard it descend, its movements just as heavy and irregular as they were going up. When the sun finally hit the peak at 6 in the morning, I didn't even pack. I left the gear, the radio, my logbook, everything. I climbed down the ladder, my knees shaking, and hiked 12 miles to the nearest trailhead. I didn't look back once, and I quit that day. I haven't taken a job in the mountains since then. Now, I don't know exactly what that was. I don't know if it was related to the orange tarp that I saw. I don't know if somebody was pulling a prank on me. I don't know. All I do know is that it scared the ever-living daylights out of me, and I just refused to go back there. So I was working a temporary gig setting up displays for a trade show in a massive convention center in downtown Seattle. The facility is a labyrinth of interconnected wings and basement-level loading docks that never really see the light of day. It was 1 in the morning, and the main event was starting soon, so the floor was littered with half-unpacked crates and piles of cardboard just everywhere. I'd been working for 14 hours straight by this point, and finally I had a break, so I headed to one of the older industrial-style bathrooms near the service elevator. The place, though, was absolutely huge. White tile from floor to ceiling, harsh fluorescent lights that hummed, and about 20 stalls that hadn't been updated since like the 80s at least. I walked to the far end of the row of urinals, and I was alone. Or so I thought at least. A few seconds after I started, the sound of the heavy steel-plated exit door creaked open, echoing through the room. There were no footsteps, just the long drawn-out groan of the hinges. I waited for the sound of footsteps on the concrete, but there was nothing. I kept my gaze fixed on the wall, and a moment later, somebody stepped up to the urinal directly to my left. I didn't turn my head. That's just the unspoken rule, but I could feel them standing there. They weren't moving. They were breathing in short, sharp, and wet gasps. I finished up as quickly as I could, but as I reached for the handle to flush, a hand, long and covered in what looked like dry blue ink or dye, slammed onto the partition between us. It didn't grip the wall. It just pressed hard enough that the metal shuddered and groaned under the weight. I didn't flush in the end. I turned my head to say something, thinking that maybe it was a coworker trying to play a joke, but the man at the next urinal wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his own reflection in the tile wall, his mouth literally hanging open. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, and he was like vibrating, an intense seizure-like sort of vibration that shook his entire frame. At first, I genuinely thought that maybe he was having a seizure too, and I sort of panicked. But then he started making a sound. It wasn't a laugh, it was a high, sustained sort of whistle. like air escaping a pinhole in a tire, rising in pitch until it made my teeth literally ache. I didn't even zip up in the end. I just sort of took a step back and lunged for the door. I didn't look back until I was 50 feet down the corridor as well. And as I turned the corner, I heard the whistle stop instantly, replaced by the sound of 20 stall doors, all slamming shut at the exact same time. Just a huge bang. Well, as you can probably imagine, I didn't go back down there. I walked straight out to the parking garage, sat in my truck for the rest of my break, and I tried not to think about it. My hands, though, they just wouldn't stop shaking. I eventually went and spoke to a manager at that time, and I asked them about this guy. I described them to him and asked what his problem was, but none of them could account for this guy. It was like he either didn't work there or they just didn't know him or something. I still don't know what to think about that night, but if you had seen that guy and the way that he was behaving, it honestly would have creeped anyone out. Two Tuesdays ago, I was holed up in a tiny rented attic room in a Victorian-era house in Portland. It must have been around 2 in the morning, and I was trying to finish a massive freelance design project. The room was so hot too, and so I had the window cracked open about 2 inches, just enough to catch a breeze from the alleyway below. The neighborhood is pretty dense, old houses packed tight, with narrow walkways between them. I was hunched over my desk, the glow of the 2 monitors illuminating the room, when I heard somebody moving around on the pavement right beneath my window. I leaned back, thinking that maybe it was just a neighbor coming home late or something. I didn't look down at first. I just sort of listened. It was the sound of a bike, maybe, and the bike stopped, and then the sound of a heavy metallic object, maybe a tool bag or something, hit the concrete. I stood up and moved to the edge of the window. I kept my head back, peeking through the curtain. Down in the alley below, a person in a heavy hooded rain slicker was standing perfectly still. They weren't looking at the houses. They were holding a flashlight, but they weren't using the beam to, see. They were holding the light against their own chest, clicking it on and off in rapid, uneven bursts. It almost looked like they were signaling someone, but the alley was empty. Anyway, after a minute, they stopped and they turned the flashlight off, reached into their pocket and pulled out a long, thin, rod-looking thing. It almost looked like a high-end fiber optic scope, if you've ever seen one before. They walked up to the back door of the house next door, pushed the rod into the seam of the door frame, and stood there, staring into the eyepiece for a long, silent minute. Upon seeing that, my throat went dry, and I realized that my attic window was the highest point on the block, and from that angle, if I looked up, they would see the silhouette of my head against the blue light of my monitors. So I didn't move. I slowly reached over and killed the power to both screens, plunging the room into absolute darkness, and I waited. The person in the alley didn't move, though. They just stood by that door, looking up at my window, and stayed there for what felt like maybe 10 minutes, completely still. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare slide the window shut. The friction would have been loud enough to hear a block away. And then they slowly turned back to their bike, but they didn't ride away at first. Instead, they pointed their fingers at me in a gun shape and cocked their thumb and pretended to shoot at my window. They then walked the bike silently toward the far end of the alley, stopping every 3 steps to turn and look back at me. They didn't check any other houses, and they didn't look at anything else. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they were attempting to break in somewhere. But when they finally disappeared around the corner, I didn't call the police because I really didn't want to explain why I was awake and why I was looking at my window at 2 in the morning, and honestly, I just didn't think that they would believe me anyway. Plus, what could they really do? Instead, I just sort of sat on the floor, tucked behind the radiator, and tried to think about what I could do next. I did keep an eye out for this person after this, but as far as I know, they never came back. But still, I do know that that lower apartment that the person was trying to get into, that they have young kids there and there's a single mother living there too. And again, I don't know exactly what that person was doing, but it sure looked a lot like a break-in attempt. I grew up in a town in northern Vermont where the winters are long enough to make people sort of lose their grip on reality a little bit. I moved away to Boston, though, about 5 years ago for work, and I don't really go back there very much. My brother, though, who still lives in that town, he called me 3 nights ago. He was shaking. I could hear it in his voice. He told me that he'd been at a hardware store on the edge of town and that apparently he saw me standing in the aisle looking at paint samples. He said that he didn't think twice about it, just walked up and slapped me on the shoulder. The person turned around and it was me. My face, my build, the exact faded denim jacket that I used to wear back when I was still living there, but the person didn't recognize him. He said the guy sort of looked at him with an expression of pure blank hostility, said, "You've got the wrong person," and then just walked away. My brother said that he followed him out, but the guy was just gone all of a sudden. Literally vanished into the parking lot is what he said. Now, I'm not a believer in the paranormal at all, and I assumed at first that my brother was either drunk or had a psychotic break or something, but here's the thing. I haven't been back to Vermont in like 3 years, and he even sent a picture that he snapped on his phone before the guy turned around. It's a blurry one taken from behind, but the posture is unmistakable. It is the way that I stand. The slight dip in the left shoulder from an old sports injury, and like I said, the guy's wearing my clothes and everything. But I mean, it's impossible. Yesterday I got an email from an address that I didn't recognize too. The subject line was just a series of coordinates that pointed to a patch of forest, I think, about 2 miles from my parents' old place. I spent the whole day staring at my own reflection in the window today, and I started noticing things that I hadn't before too. A tiny hairline scar in my left temple from a bike accident, I think, when I was about 12. I went to the bathroom and looked closely, and the scar was definitely there, so I tried to look at the picture again, but it's a little blurry, but I think you can make out the scar in this guy's head. I don't know what's happening, and I've started locking my doors at night, and I don't sleep with the lights off anymore either. My brother stopped calling, and when I tried to ring back, I'm just going to voicemail now. I'm currently sitting in my apartment in Boston looking at this photo and just freaking out about it. Like I said, I've never really believed in the paranormal, but this is just beyond weird. In the summer of 2012, I decided that I'd had enough of all the noise. I was burned out, hovering on the edge of a nervous breakdown from a brutal semester. So I packed my car and I drove north until the pavement gave way to gravel, and then the gravel gave way to nothing. I'd found a listing for a remote seasonal hunting cabin tucked deep into the interior of British Columbia. No electricity, no cell reception, just literally a wooden box set high in an altitude basin surrounded by ancient, stunted cedar trees that were twisted into agonizing shapes by the relentless wind. My friend, who was just as desperate for a disconnect as I was, joined me. We weren't there for work. We were there to sit on a porch, drink cheap coffee, and stare at the mountains until our brains finally turned off. The first 3 days were perfect too. The kind of absolute stillness that makes you realize just how much tension you've been carrying in your jaw for so long. But the air in that basin, it was never quite right. It always felt heavy, thick with a static charge almost, as if a localized lightning storm was perpetually 10 minutes away from breaking. On the 4th day, though, we decided to hike up toward the ridge to get a better vantage point of the valley. We wandered further than we had actually intended, drifting off the rudimentary game trails and into a section of the forest that felt increasingly claustrophobic. The trees grew tighter, their branches interweaving like fingers, until the sunlight barely touched the forest floor. We stumbled upon the clearing quite by accident. It really shouldn't have been there too. It was a perfect barren circle, 30 feet in diameter I would say, where nothing was growing. And I mean, it wasn't just cleared, it looked sterile. In the center stood a single massive stone cairn as well. This wasn't the kind of haphazard pile that a hiker builds to mark a trail too. It was a huge spiral of slate, stacked with a precision that you couldn't have slipped a blade of grass between the layers. I felt at the moment, though, that we stepped into the periphery of that circle, a weird feeling like the sound of a high-voltage transformer almost, vibrating in the back of my skull. My friend, he didn't say anything though, but he certainly stopped walking, taking a moment to catch his breath. He grabbed my arm all of a sudden, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise me almost. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I didn't answer because I was too busy watching the light. It didn't get dark, but it sort of changed quality, I would say. The vibrant green of the moss, the deep brown of the earth, it all just sort of bled away all of a sudden. Between the cairn and the tree line, the air began to fray a little bit too. It looked like a shimmer of heat rising off of a hot road on a 100-degree day, but it wasn't concreted in a distinct upright shape or anything. As we watched, though, paralyzed, the shimmer sort of hardened. Now, it wasn't human, but it certainly looked like human geometry almost. Tall but slender, with joints that seemed sort of hinged the wrong way, folding inward at the elbows and the knees. It was entirely translucent though, like a pane of glass shaped into a man, catching the light in a way that hurt the eyes to track it. And it hovered 6 inches above the rocky ground, defying gravity. And if you've ever seen those videos online where people catch like a predator-like sort of camouflage thing moving through the forest, that's pretty much exactly what this looked like. It didn't look at us though. It was sort of rotating slowly, clicking through angles almost like a broken stop-motion puppet. There was a stutter and then a motion and then another one, and every time it snapped to a new position, there was this sort of chiming sound almost, echoing around the basin. My friend, he didn't make a sound. He just dropped his pack and started walking backward toward the forest. His gait was stiff and his eyes were fixed on this thing the whole time. But the break in the silence was immediate. The figure's head, if that's what you can call it, snapped toward us with a violent, jarring pop, like a dry branch breaking. The humming in my head suddenly spiked, and I felt this sharp pain in the back of my skull. I didn't wait to see if it would move toward us or anything. I scrambled up, shoved my friend toward the tree line, and we just ran. We didn't look for the trail, and we tore through the dense brush, branches whipping our faces and tearing our clothes the whole way back, driven by a complete primal terror that had my nervous system on fire. We didn't stop until we hit the cabin too, our lungs burning, and when we got back, we locked everything and we sat there looking at the windows for hours. We didn't talk much about what we had seen though. I think we were too afraid to put it into words really, but we certainly acknowledged that it was real. We packed our things in the dark that evening, my hands shaking so hard that I could barely buckle my bags, and we hiked the 10 miles back to the trailhead just before dark hit. I never did go back there, and I never told anyone about this for a really long time. 2 years later, though, I was talking to some people online about this, trying to get some answers from some people who apparently know about all this stuff, and anyway, about 20 minutes into the conversation, one of the guys told me that apparently there had been reports of a glass man in that sector going back decades. He said that crews who had been out there, that they would leave within a week because people who stayed in that basin too long came back fundamentally altered, is what he said. Apparently there's all sorts of stories from that region too. People with stories of missing time, people seeing things, all sorts of stuff. I wasn't exactly satisfied with that answer, so I spent a lot of years trying to research this place and the glass man and all this sort of stuff. Hence my comments earlier about the YouTube videos and the predator thing, but to this day, I still haven't found much beyond those videos. I don't know what it was, and every now and then my friend and I still talk about it, although both of us have not come any closer to understanding exactly what it is. It was late October in 2024. I was staying in a sprawling, decommissioned estate in rural Kentucky, doing inventory for an auction house. The house had been empty for a decade, and I was the only person on the property. My sleeping bag was set up in the library, a massive circular room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a heavy sliding oak ladder even. I had been working for about 6 hours at this point, cataloguing rare books, when, at some point, the temperature in the room just dropped sharply all of a sudden. I could see my own breath frosting in the air even. I stood up to adjust the thermostat, and that's when I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the room near the fireplace. She was wearing a faded, high-collared Victorian dress, her back to me, her hand resting on the mantel. Hey, I called out, my voice sounding a bit flat and dead in the huge room. The house is off limits. How did you get in? She didn't turn around, but she answered. I've been waiting for the inventory to finish. Her voice, though, was weird. It was sort of distorted in a sort of echoey way. I froze. I shone my light directly on her from my phone. The light passed right through the fabric of her dress, though, illuminating the mahogany paneling behind her. She wasn't solid at all. I took a step back upon seeing that. Who are you? And then she just disappeared. Well, I didn't ask any questions. I didn't try to rationalize what I had seen. I turned, scrambled out of the library, literally sprinting toward the front entrance. As I fumbled with the keys trying to get out, I heard her again, and it sounded like she was laughing behind me in the library. But it wasn't one voice. It was a chorus of my own laughter, stacked on top of itself, overlapping and chaotic, like a recording played on a loop almost. I eventually made it out of there, and I got to my car, and I sped out of there as quickly as I could. I only went back there during the day after that. My laptop, my notes, and my clothes were there, so I had to go back at some point to get it all. I was super nervous about going back too, but thankfully nothing happened during the time that I was there during the day. Now, I don't really tell people about this story because, look, I get it. It sounds made up, and I wouldn't believe it if somebody else had told me too, but I swear to you that everything that I've said here is 100% the truth. I never used to believe in ghosts, paranormal, demons, or anything like that. Well, up until that night. Since then, though, I've been questioning everything. What is reality? Is there life after death? All this stuff. It's hard to explain just what an existential sort of shift this is to somebody who hasn't really gone through something like it, but anyway. What do you guys think that she actually was? Was she a ghost? Was she a demon? Or something else entirely? So I was visiting a remote, privately owned island last July, and I wasn't there for work. I was actually house-sitting for an old college friend who needed someone to keep an eye on his grandfather's place while he traveled abroad. It was a sprawling, modernist concrete structure too, built right on the side of a cliff, designed by some architect who clearly prioritized aesthetics over accessibility. Anyway, the island was pretty much deserted at this time. Just me, the wind, and the sound of the tide hitting the rocks far below. It was my third night there, around 4 a.m. I was actually in the living room reading by the fireplace when I sort of got this weird feeling, like I was being watched. It became so strong, in fact, that I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that separated the living room from the terrace, and outside it was pitch black, but the floodlight was active. I then noticed that there was a woman sitting on the edge of the terrace, her legs dangling over the cliffside. She was wearing a woolen cardigan that looked completely soaked through. She was also shivering a lot and looked really cold. Obviously, I didn't open the door. I just sort of knocked on the glass, and she stopped shivering immediately. She didn't turn around. She just sort of tilted her head to the side at a really weird angle until her ear touched her shoulder almost. And then she stopped, and then she stood up. She didn't use her legs, though. She just sort of pushed off with her hands and rose into a standing position, as if she were weightless almost. She turned around, but I couldn't see her face. It was like all blurry. I backed away even more, tripped over an ottoman and hit my head on the coffee table, and at that point, I just completely blacked out. When I came to the next morning, the sun was streaming into the room and the glass was perfectly clear. There was no frost, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But on the outside of the glass, right at eye level, was a perfect oily smudge of a handprint. I must have spent an hour scrubbing at it with vinegar and scrapers and everything, but it just wouldn't budge. It was like etched into the surface almost, as if the glass had been permanently damaged. I did finish my time there, and I watched over the place for the rest of the week, and thankfully nothing else happened. I never did mention it to my friend either because, well, I didn't want them to think that I was crazy. Because, quite honestly, I wanted to house it again because that place is absolutely amazing. I am normally pretty skeptical of supernatural things, but there were 3 times where I can definitely say that I saw the Shadow Man commonly referred to as the Hat Man. The first time was when I was 5 or 6. My family was living in a house and my parents had contracted to build, so it was not by any means an old house. One morning, like crack of dawn early, I used to be an early riser. My older brother and I were making toaster strudels, and I don't quite recall the reason that I had wandered into the hall that connected the kitchen to the entryway, but I did, and when I was halfway down the hall, I saw a tall shadow wearing a hat of some kind. It was hovering a few feet off the floor. I screamed, and I ran to get my brother, but by the time that we went back to the entryway, it was gone. The second time was at a completely different house, also freshly built as a part of a new subdivision. I was a teenager in high school at the time, and this encounter has less of a story, I guess. I was home alone one night. The lights downstairs were off. The only light on was the upstairs hallway. I got hungry at some stage and went down to get something to eat. As I came back up the stairs, I felt a strange urge to run up them to my room, which was right at the top of the stairs. When I reached the second floor hallway, I chanced to look behind me and I saw the same hat-wearing figure at the bottom of the stairs. Now, with the way the light fell, it could have been my own shadow, but my shadow was on the stairs, and this entity was on the ground floor, again hovering just above the floor. His form was somehow distinct from the darkness of the unilluminated lower floor as well. I promptly entered my room, and I decided not to go downstairs until morning. Now, a few years later at a third house, this time the house was a bit older. As it was not built for my parents, they just moved into it. I was living at home after college, and again, one late night, I went downstairs to get a late-night snack. Not being as familiar with the house, I did turn the lights on to navigate to the kitchen. Turning them back off as I went back upstairs, I once again felt the urge to run up the stairs. Turning around at the top once again, I saw a shadow of a man in a hat. I looked away, then back, and when I did, he was gone. Now, I haven't seen him since then, and now that I live at my parents' newest house, I wonder if I ever will again. It's another one that they had built, and I've only seen this entity those 3 times. Each time was late at night or early morning, all different houses owned by my parents, and always by the front door, always a shadow in a hat. I specify my parents own the houses because I never saw it at my friends' houses when I stayed over, or in hotels or on vacations or anything. I didn't see it at either of my apartments in college, nor while I briefly lived with my grandmother or at the apartment that I lived in last year. It wasn't until I recently learned of the Hat Man, a paranormal entity apparently seen by many in the world, with eerily similar descriptions, despite no relation or contact between those who saw it, that I've put everything together and I now know this figure as the Hat Man. I'm still researching and learning about this topic, but if you've got anything to add, then I would love to hear it. So my aunt was telling me she and my niece, 12 years old, came over to my house to drop some stuff off 2 days ago, around 8:30 at night. I try to leave my porch and kitchen lights off as much as I can to save money and all that, but I'll turn them on when I answer the door for, well, anyone really. This interaction took place in the dark, no porch lights were on, the kitchen light wasn't on, and my aunt was sitting in her car with her headlights on facing the door, so she watched this whole thing happen. Now my niece knocked on my front door, I have a screen door, and said that my sister answered the door but was behind the screen door. She said that she also saw my other sister's boyfriend standing behind her in the kitchen. She tried to ask for me, but my sister didn't say anything to her and just sort of stared at her through the screen door. She said that something seemed off about her, that she got scared, so she ran back to the car and told her mum what had happened. But here's the kicker. My sisters and the boyfriend moved out going on like 2 months ago. I live completely alone. I was home alone that night, in fact. I was in my room the whole night and I didn't hear the knocking or the talking or anything. The only thing I remember happening was my dog barking. I paused my TV and sat in silence, trying to hear anything that would make him bark, but heard nothing. I don't know what time that was exactly, but I'm assuming that he must have heard the knocking. I asked my aunt over and over again if she was sure that that happened, because, I was home alone, and there is no way either of my sisters or the boyfriend could have answered the door that night. But she and my niece swear that that happened, and now I really don't feel comfortable in my own home. My dog this morning kept growling and barking. He's very sweet and quiet unless he feels threatened or a danger. He was barking at something that I couldn't see or hear, and that freaked me out even more. Recently, I've had this fear of encountering a mimic since living home alone, so I'm very on edge, and I don't really care what other people think about this, but I needed to share it, and I'm hoping to get some advice as to, well, how to make any of this stop quickly. So picture this. It's Connecticut, middle of winter in January of 2008, and we had just gotten lots of snow. Me and 4 other friends had been working hard at our small community college, and we wanted something to do over winter break. We ended up finding a cute little cabin on a lake up near Orient, Maine, and after much fuss from our parents, we put our money down and started getting ready for the road trip. Keep in mind, this was before the shift from MapQuest to the common use of GPS, TomToms, etc., and before my cell phone was attached to my hip too. But we found directions on MapQuest though, and set off on our first taste of freedom in a while. We packed into my friend's small red Acura and drove the 8+ hours from CT after our last college course around 2 p.m. Looking back on this, it was a horrid idea to pack 5 kids into a small car in the middle of winter and drive in the northern states. It was cold and dreary the whole ride up. That wet and cold that sticks to you, you know it if you've been in it. The driver, his name was Jay, he was in love with his Acura. He had very strict rules for driving, gassing it up and stopping, so we settled into the car for a long stretch of driving and blasted some music to pass the time. Further north, we got to where the weather sort of became where the roads were, and we became very nervous, and it was icing. The further you get up into mid-Maine, the further the distance between exits, snow lights, and all that is. It's basically just the moon and the stars. Looming pine forests line the two-lane highway, and it's a sparsely populated area. Tiny little towns, mile off of the highway, peppering the landscape. Because of this, we agreed to make one long food stop only for dinner. Delicious Taco Bell. And before heading into more desolate areas, during dinner, I made the rookie mistake of getting a giant Sprite, but made sure to use the bathroom before we left, and we continued on into the night. Infrequently, I spotted glimmers of lights from little homes and towns passed from the passenger seat, and after a couple of hours, there came a point that I really needed to pee. When I mention it, it's usually at the last minute, and it was an imminent nuclear-level disaster if we didn't stop soon. But there were no signs for a gas station on, well, any of the last 10 exits for the past 40 minutes, and I was ready to pull over on the side of the road I was busting. It was beyond painful. But my friend driving was paranoid and refused. He said, something just didn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to stop. Now, I'm usually very good with sensing strangeness, but I was so distracted by my body mechanics that I didn't care, to be honest. I pressed my eyes shut, drummed my hands and fingers, started singing with music, and pleading to whatever god was out there that could hear me, anything to help distract me. And as if the universe heard my plea and I manifested it myself, the next exit had a small sign for a locally owned gas station, which was going to be absolutely perfect. After a little protest, I let Jay know that his car would soon be baptized in my urine, and so we pulled off. We drove another 10 minutes until we pulled up at this tiny, I'm talking like 500 square feet max, dimly lit and decrepit gas station. Nothing surrounded us for miles, and there was a large paved area that surrounded this small building, seemingly to make it easier for large trucks with small trailers to pull around the back, I guess. A dumpster sat in the back left by the trees. No lights in the parking lot, just light from the sliver of the waxing moon. Inside the shop, there were 2 green fluorescent lights, but they barely reached the 2 old pumps outside. It seemed like the darkness was encroaching on the sickly-looking gas station, almost ready to swallow it. The moonlight, it just didn't seem to touch it, though, and that creepy feeling that we had all started to talk about was now growing stronger. We chalked it up to the unfamiliar territory, and the fact that it was dead of winter in the middle of the night. I practically teleported out of the passenger seat and inside, barely getting out the word bathroom, when the tired, middle-aged attendant slowly reached for the keys and finally tossed them to me, not saying a word, crooking his hand and pointing to the outside corner of the small building. My stomach got that quick anxiety pang. I strongly remember having such an uneasy feeling about going back there. As I ran back out of the door, I demanded everyone come back and stand outside to wait for me, for safety and for company. My boyfriend obliged, and the others understandably stayed in the car. I rounded the corner and did a brief double take as I saw someone standing by the dumpster. Just a dark figure. The moonlight reflected off of their dark, short hair and what looked to be a fur-lined coat. The urge to pee was too strong now, though, for me to care about it for even a moment, and I felt reassured hearing my boyfriend's footsteps behind me, too. I struggled to unlock the door, and as I made it inside, fumbled for a switch. Much to my delight, I discovered that there was no lighting as I started to relieve myself. Fantastic. I called through the beat-up metal door for something, anything to light up this closet of a bathroom. I had left my phone in the car cup holder, unfortunately, and I hear a small shuffling sound, and my imagination was running wild. Bugs crawling around the walls, bumping into spent toilet paper, a person standing in the corner. My boyfriend at the time thankfully had a flashlight. He was in the military and always came prepared. I didn't lock it, so he pegged it through the crack in the door, and my eyes had adjusted to the darkness at this stage. I remember seeing the treetops, the starry night in all of its beauty, and some dark mass by the dumpster again, through the crack, before clicking on the light, which honestly blinded me at first. My sixth sense, for a lack of a better term, was starting to become more prevalent, now that I had started to get physical relief. I kept telling myself it's just an unfamiliar area in the dead of night, nothing to worry about. I felt overall unwelcome though, and felt the need to rush too. I remember that unwelcome feeling vividly. I recall my boyfriend. He had asked if I was almost done, to which I replied I was not even close. I heard some talking getting closer, and Sam, the other girl on the trip, made a comment along the lines of, "You see that? Who would be outside at this hour in the cold like this?" And I hear her boyfriend say something like, "Yeah, it's 10 degrees outside. There's no way." Another strange voice came through the door. It was the gas station attendant coming with them. I learned later that Sam had decided to go pee too since we were stopping, and she saw the figure as well. She went inside to tell the attendant about someone outside, and she mentioned that he didn't respond but came out from behind the counter. As I was finishing buttoning up my jeans, feeling a million times better, I swear that I heard breath in my ear. As corny as that sounds, even though I had this deep pit of fear and unease growing in my gut ever since we arrived, in that moment, I convinced myself that it was just me shuffling around on the dirty tiles. Though, I know that I didn't move my feet. Dirt crunching softly does not sound like a human breath either. And even as I share this, my whole body just chills up. In any case, I immediately raised the flashlight up to the mirror that was fogged with the age and the soap scum. No one was behind me, thankfully. I was ready to hit the road, though, and get the heck out of Dodge. So I flung open the door and booked it through my boyfriend, Sam, and her boyfriend, and the attendant, who was standing a bit hunched near them, which was a bit odd, I admit. I scanned the empty pavement. There seemed to be this lingering darkness hanging around the forest line where it met the parking lot. I turned to the dumpster, and this time no one was there. It should have been reassuring, I know, but it ended up freaking me out even more. "I think we should go. Sam, do you really have to pee?" I asked. I remember she looked uncomfortable. They all did. It was like the attendant was trying to block us from rounding the corner to get to the front of the store, or keep us in the area so something could sneak up on us and maybe attack us. I just got that threatening feeling all of a sudden. In hindsight, maybe he was just trying to make sure we didn't trash anything. I don't know, but I heard Jay start up the Acura, and I gave the attendant a wide berth. He wasn't saying anything, wasn't even really looking at us. I swear the darkness that seemed to be devouring the light from the shop earlier was emanating off or around him, though. And I know that this is going to sound a bit crazy, but you know when you can just sort of tell that somebody has bad intentions? Well, everything screamed in me that it was time to go. Sam and everyone picked up on the hint, and they rushed to the pumps, piling into the car as fast as we could, and pulling out. We laughed about it, once we were about 20 minutes away, that is, down one of the main freeways. We eventually made it to the cabin, and we enjoyed our first night there. Now, the second part of this story was the next day. We had brought some snacks and cereal, but after messing around, enjoying the frozen lake and watching movies all day, we quickly realized that we needed some more sustenance, and had asked one of the neighboring cabins if there was a town around where we could go and get supplies and food. The neighbor told us about a Walmart or someplace up Route 1 to Hulton. The populated town was almost an hour away, but the neighbor said to just drive straight for about 45 minutes and you'll be in downtown before you know it. It was later in the evening. The sun had gone down, and we once again all piled into Jay's Acura, and me in the front seat, my boyfriend right behind me, Sam and her boyfriend next to him. Jay, he was super nervous to drive. Temperatures had gone from single digits to negatives, which meant that the wet had turned to ice in many areas. But we made the slow and steady trip up to Hulton, got our supplies, and made our way back to the cabin. Halfway there, rounding one of the bends, he saw a person on the road. No distinguishing features, according to him, but Jay had started to panic a bit, yet slowed down and turned the car to avoid them, but ended up hitting a patch of black ice. The next thing we know, we're all spinning out of control slowly off the road. I remember putting my foot up on the dash and my hand up to the ceiling as we hit a telephone pole with my passenger door. We descended into the snow-covered ditch, mostly unharmed, thankfully, discovering later as we were towed by a good Samaritan that we were 10 feet from landing in a river. Jay mentioned why he had started swerving, to which he was told abruptly that there was absolutely no one on the road. We were incredibly lucky, and we weren't the only car to slide off the road in the last 24 hours, apparently. There was a tan Mazda van about 30 feet to the left of us that had also shared a similar fate that night before. They, however, had landed in the water, but thankfully they still had all survived. Poor Jay was beside himself with heartbreak due to his poor car and the damages and all that. Thankfully, there was a body shop up in Hulton that could help. But he swears, based on what we were telling him on the car ride up the night before, that something had followed us or attached to us. He was adamant it must have been the person from the gas station, but we all didn't see what he saw. Maybe the attendant cursed us. Maybe it was just bad luck and bad timing. Whatever the case, though, we were grateful that nothing more came of it. But we ended up doing a little seance or prayer thing that night to try and detach whatever energy seemed to have followed us, and had no issues during the remainder of the trip, thankfully. We, unfortunately, aren't friends anymore, but I do have a female attachment that I've had a couple of brushes with in the past, and most recently, last year. So, if you've made it this far, then thanks for hearing me out. It was one of the strangest experiences that I've had over the years, and it's something that's always stuck with me. I would probably write the whole thing off as just anxiety, but the fact that Jay saw that person on the road and we didn't see anything, that part has always troubled me. Meet Jane. I don't know much about Jane except that she's from a small town and she moved here with her friends and boyfriend for university. When I first met Jane at the pub, I honestly thought that she hated my guts. I mean, she always gave me nasty looks, and when my friends tried to approach her friends, she'd always be rude to me. Jane is pretty, like very pretty. Like every guy in town has a thing for her sort of pretty. But Jane's boyfriend is insane, to say the least. They are regulars at the pub, and I've seen them break up around 3 to 4 times, and the waiter working at the pub, guy in my friend group, says that he's noticed them break up a dozen more, but they always come back together. A couple of months back, though, I had just finished within the gym, and I had just showered when my mum called and asked about this pub, and how's the food there. I told her that the food's to die for, and she said that she and my stepdad were on their way there. I told them that I would meet them too, because I was dying for some hot wings and a burger or something. We sit down. Me and my dad just started drinking beer after beer, and in no time I had downed 5 pints of beer. I was getting a little bit tipsy, but I kept pushing through. My dear friend, Tina, called and asked if I was down for a drink. I told her to come to the pub as I was already there. She was going to meet my folks, and they planned on leaving soon anyway, so she and I could continue then. And that's how it happened. My parents left, and Tina and I continued drinking on our own. The pub was closing, so Tina decided to go to the bathroom, and I walked with her inside to see if I could get another pint, which was when we stumbled upon Jane. Jane starts talking to Tina, and I realize that they must know each other. We all sit down to comfort her as she was a crying mess. Her boyfriend and she were done for good this time, apparently, and she revealed that he used to really abuse her, mentally and physically. Honestly, I felt bad for her, so when she rested on my shoulder, I just sort of let her. Tomorrow night, I get a DM from her, and she's apologizing about the trauma dumping. I tell her that it's no biggie, as we all need to vent sometimes, albeit I do that with my therapist. Not strangers, but whatever. The therapist is a stranger, I guess, that I pay. In any case, we continue chatting, and she constantly goes between I can't text you and then texting me again, don't text me and text me first when I don't. Keep in mind, this is like 2 days since that interaction. Anyway, one drunken night, she texted me to meet her. It was around 2 in the morning, and I had my little cousin over. That whole night we watched movies, and we had just basically fallen asleep, so I declined her offer. Also, I felt it was a bit weird for me to hang out with her when I was completely sober while she could barely see. I don't know, just weird to me. But the next day, she sobered up and I agreed to meet her for a hangout. We hung out for a while and she was honestly fun to hang out with. I did like her and I worried about her and her ex, I guess. Soon enough, her leech of an ex left town as he was never really interested in uni, just being close to her. And on one of our dates, she revealed to me that she realized that she had feelings for me. And that's when she broke up with her ex, resulting in him physically attacking her. One day we had a date at her place, a little study date. After we finished studying, we relaxed on the couch and ended up making out. We didn't go the whole way that night by any means. But I went home and we continued talking about it, even exchanging photos. And then we hooked up. Now, I'm a person who likes alone time, I guess you could say. So sometimes I just want to chill at my house and not really be with anyone. And she did not like this idea at all. She started spamming me with calls, saying how she should come over and we could chill, she'll be silent and I'll still be alone. In my opinion, this kind of defeats the idea of being alone, as I'm, well, not alone. That's when she threatened me, though, that if I didn't pick up the phone, that she would never talk to me again. This is where I snapped, and I told her that her lukewarm at best manipulation tactics would not work on me, and not to contact me again. She flipped out, and came to my part of town, hanging out and waiting for me to come out. I told her, I begged her 1,000,000 times not to come out to my house, but she simply said no, I'll pass, and came anyway. I literally felt so disrespected because all of a sudden I just had no value in life. When she texted me, come out, I'm here, I texted her, nah, I'll pass, and I stayed home. And now, she's been following me everywhere that I go. It's been months, and I'm now dating a different girl, the girl of my dreams, but that hasn't stopped her from being in my shadow. She learned my routine, when I go to the gym, when I'm at practice, etc. And she never fails to show up or drive past where I'm at. My stepbrother even reviewed the security footage from our house, and we've counted her car driving past my house at least 14 times in a day. I still get texts from her on the daily, even though she's blocked. She gets wasted and spams me with messages on WhatsApp that she then deletes later. My girlfriend is obviously absolutely livid with this chick, as she would not leave me the heck alone. I don't fear for my life, I guess, but I have warned my friends that if I do die, that it would not be an accident, or me just self-deleting myself. She's in my shadow, and I constantly have to check my 6 to see if she's behind me. Anyway, 2 days ago, I went to the pub with my friend Stan. He's a new friend of mine, as he's a close friend of one of my best friends. My neighbour best friend, Jake, was in Durban to visit his aunt, and me and Stan went to the pub as his friend and my other best friend, Liam. They were having the closing shift at the pub that night. So we went and we visited him and had a few drinks, and she was there. And everyone was giving me these weird stares like I'd murdered their whole family or something. Finally, the shift manager whom I'm close to came to me, and she laughingly told me that Jane got extremely drunk and talked about a man the whole night at the pub while sobbing. She then showed them a picture of me, and according to some other waiters, she was throwing an entire tantrum because she loved me and she left her boyfriend because of me. Regardless, I brushed it off and had to fight off the player accusation, because I'm just not one. Liam finished his shift though. We got into my car and we drove to my house where my girlfriend had already arrived. My mum and her were in the kitchen making dinner, and my stepbrother, younger brother, and stepdad were in the living room just shooting the breeze really, so I joined them with my friends. At one point, I was in the kitchen with my mum, girlfriend and stepbrother, and my mum asked, who made the kitchen into a mess this morning? And my stepbrother said that it was me and my younger brother. We laughed at this, so I didn't hear the doorbell when it rang. My stepdad did, and he went to open the door. Jane, she was at the door and she had let herself in, and she was standing in my living room yelling after me. We came out of the kitchen and we were just sort of staring at her. She begged to talk to me, and I just stared at her and told her that we'd already covered everything. But she continued begging me. My girlfriend pulled me aside and told me that I should just talk with her and maybe it will give her closure and she'll leave me alone then. So I took her to my backyard and she started apologizing for hurting me. She said, "I'm sorry," like 15 times. I told her that she has nothing to apologize for and that I just sadly cannot forgive manipulations that easily, and that she should really just give up. She started blaming the alcohol on it though, and how she was drunk that night. I told her that she's been drunk every day for like 9 months now since she arrived in this town. She's only known me for like 6 of those 9 months, mind you. She tells me how she used to drink herself crazy back then because of me too. And here's where I sort of snapped a bit, and I told her that I just caught her in another one of her lies, and she smirked, gave me this creepy look and said, "I love lying to you." The look she gave me, honestly, sent shivers down my spine. My yard was dark and her eyes just seemed demonic for a moment. She was continuously getting closer to me, and I froze. I couldn't step back. Not that she'd hurt me, I guess, as I'm 6'2" and 250 pounds, but a knife could do some good damage. But Jane, she had another idea. She launched herself at me, locking her lips with mine. I pushed her off, yelling for her to stop, yelling no. I walked inside and I was ticked. My girlfriend looked like she was about to beat her up, and I looked at my stepdad and begged for him to drive her home. They got her out of my house as she was literally kicking and screaming. But then she refused my stepdad's car ride and she decided to walk instead. In the middle of the night, mind you, in South Africa. Whoever has lived in South Africa will know that this is a stupid idea. Anyway, thankfully she got home safe as I woke up to text from her on WhatsApp that she had deleted again from a phone number that she had blocked me from. And as much as I'd hoped that that was going to be the end of it, it definitely wasn't. You see, for the past 3 months, until the 25th of September, my girlfriend and I, together with my younger brother, we went to Germany for one of our relatives' weddings. It was here that my girlfriend met my dad and my older brother who lives in the States, and overall in these 3 months I had no worries about Jane, as well as no contact with her at all. Well, the 25th rolls around and the 3 of us land back in South Africa. My stepdad picks us up and we went back to my house for lunch, and then I drove my girlfriend back to her house. I was pretty exhausted from the flight, so her and I took a nap at her place, got up at around 7, and she started getting ready for the night out. At 9 we sat in this one pub with 3 of my friends, and my best friend snapped a picture of me, posting it on his story with the caption, "The boys back in town," together with the bald eagle and burger emojis. Man, I hate that guy, but, well, not even 2 minutes later, Jane walks into the pub. We brushed it off as just a coincidence, as she doesn't follow him on Instagram or anything, but we later realized that one of her friends does. We ignored her as we continued drinking. I don't know if she was staring toward us or not, as I specifically instructed everyone not to look at her direction, and overall, it was a pretty nice and fun night out, really. Fast forward to the 27th, though. My friends and I packed my truck as we planned to spend 2 days at Dragon's Peaks, a mountainous area roughly 2 hours from town. I asked my girlfriend if she was willing to come, but she said that she had plans with her girls, so she stayed in town. Well, my girlfriend went into town and into the pub that we usually chill at, and she sat behind the bar as one of her girls works there, and they wanted to include everyone in the hangout. The girl working behind the bar jokingly asked her, "You finally left your man and came crawling back to us, huh?" To which my girlfriend replied with, "I hated him so much anyway, and to heck with him." This is a paraphrasing of the conversation, obviously, as they were just joking around and drinking. But they kept joking about us breaking up and my girlfriend needing her friends again, but they didn't realize that Sam, one of Jane's friends, was there, listening to them. It was around the same time that Jane texted me from one of her burners, and I know that it was around the same time as I texted my girlfriend right away, and that's when she spotted Sam connecting the dots. But Jane asked me to meet up, at least for 15 minutes, now that I don't have a girlfriend anymore. I asked her what she was talking about, and Jane sent me a text saying that my girlfriend is embarrassing me at the pub right now, telling everyone how much she hates me, how I was one of the worst person to be born, and things of this nature. I thanked Jane for the heads up and told her that I will no longer be replying to her texts. And she starts manically texting me even more, begging to me for at least 15 minutes, and she'll get over me and she'll stop thinking about me, but how she needs to see me in person in order for her to fully move on. I told her that I wasn't in town, and she texted me something that fully made me want to get on a plane and move back to the States. She texted me, "Where the heck are you? I watched you having rugby practice this morning." This is when I put my phone down and I didn't respond. She went back to her usual texting me a ton of messages and deleting them before I could see them. She even started calling me. I blocked her, and to no one's shock, an unknown number starts calling me. I blocked her again, and I started getting phone calls from no caller ID. I knew that it was her, obviously, as that's a way to bypass being blocked. I turned off my phone and texted my girlfriend what happened from my friend's phone, telling her to contact me there if something happened. On the 29th, I went back into town and I changed my phone number. And now on the 1st of this month, I still haven't had any contact with Jane. My phone has been quiet. But I did see her car parked at the gym parking lot, so I didn't go to my usual gym today. Instead, I paid for one day of working out at another gym. My plan is to fully change my gym in the end and to start avoiding the pub altogether, hopefully so that she can finally move on. My family and friends say that it's not fair for me to miss out on hanging out with friends at a place where we've been hanging out for like 3 years now, but I really just see no other way out. I'll keep you guys updated if anything more comes of it, but please do wish me luck, and if you've got any advice on how to get rid of this chick, then I'm all ears. This experience occurred several months after another event. It was the remaining paranoia from it that helped me realize what was happening, and very well may have actually saved my life. I was 18 at the time, although commonly mistaken for being in my early teens, and had just finished some errands in town and decided to take a shortcut to catch the bus home. Said shortcut being a narrow street on one of the shopping centre's entrances opened onto. It was honestly more of a glorified alleyway, but since the street connected onto the high street, and it was the quickest way into the shopping centre, it usually got a decent amount of foot traffic and was extremely safe to use. However, depending on the time of the day, there may have only been very few, if any, people there, and that was the case on this day. Just as I was walking out of the entrance, and celebrating the fact that it wasn't blocked by people standing around talking as usual, a young man around my age startled me by stepping out of the small alcove beside the door and blocking my path with an, "Oh, hi there, how are you? Have you been shopping?" The way that he had approached me immediately put me off, but the overly familiar, fancy seeing you here sort of tone that he was using made me hesitate for a moment, wondering if he was just someone from high school who maybe recognized me and wanted to say hello. So I muttered, yeah, hi, to stall for a moment while I racked my brain for who this could have been. It didn't take me long to confirm that I didn't know a good-looking, fit blonde 20-something with bright blue eyes and a heavy accent, and since I couldn't think of a good reason someone like that would approach me, my socially awkward, non-confrontational past self decided the best way to deal with this situation was to just dodge around him and leave. He didn't let me, though. Instead of taking the hint, he immediately started walking in stride with me on the side of the street closest to the road, so that I was between him and the side of the building. And when I tried to speed up because I didn't like the feeling of being penned in, he sped up along with me, keeping me between him and the wall. As off-putting as that already was, he began asking me questions that seemed innocent enough but all centered around where I was headed, and if anyone was going to be waiting for me there. "Where are you going now? Have you not finished your shopping? Are you meeting your friends? Maybe I could come with you, or are you meeting your family instead? Do you have a boyfriend? Is he who you're meeting? Are you going home? Do you live near here, or are you getting a bus? I had already asked him to leave me alone once, and he acted like I hadn't even said anything. So I was ignoring his questions and glancing around desperately hoping that someone else would enter the street with us in case he didn't react well to being asked a second time. And that is why I noticed the second man. He was older, in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair, a short but scruffy beard, and had the kind of face and expression that tells you that you might need to be cautious when dealing with this person. I have no idea where he had come from. My guess is that he was hiding in the alcove on the other side of the door from the blonde, or further down that side of the street out of sight. But he was now walking in line with us, on the opposite side of the road, staring the entire time. I tried not to let either of the men realize that I had seen him while my brain went into overdrive, trying to figure out what their endgame was. Were they going to assault me? I mean, surely they wouldn't risk being caught doing that broad daylight, right outside of a shopping center. Maybe they were just going to rob me. But if they wanted to do that, the blonde could have just grabbed my bag and ran when he had the element of surprise back when he was hiding behind the door. And then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. You see, at the end of the street was an underground parking garage, the entrance of which opened up onto the pavement me and the blonde were walking to, and I would have to walk right past it because of the way that he was pinning me in towards that wall. It would take him barely any effort to shove me through it, and the dark-haired man across the street had been toying with something in his pocket that I worried at first was a weapon. But what if it was car keys instead? What if they were planning to drag me in there and take me into a car, take me to who knows where and do who knows what to me? We were very close to the end of the street now, so I abruptly dropped back behind the blonde and darted towards the road, wanting to get away from the garage and make a beeline for the end of the street without getting within arm's reach of the dark-haired man. The blonde immediately darted after me and blocked my path, herding me back towards the pavement and penning me in so close to the wall this time that my arm was almost scraping across it as I walked, all while still talking to me casually as if he wasn't doing anything wrong. They obviously knew that the game was up at this point though, and when I glanced over at the dark-haired man to check where he was, he locked eyes with me, laughed and called out to the blonde in a different language. The best that I was able to determine later was that it was Eastern European, but not Lithuanian, Polish, Romanian or Russian, saying something that made him laugh too and double down on his "is anyone going to miss you?" questions, while also asking me if I had ever had a boyfriend, if I had ever kissed a boy, or would I like him to be my boyfriend, etc. Obviously, I continued to ignore them and was panicking more and more as we approached the garage, but fortunately for me, the dark-haired man started to lose his patience with the blonde's lack of progress with me and began snapping at him, presumably demanding that he get me to answer because the blonde looked worried and his tone was getting more urgent every time the man spoke to him. Only a few feet from the garage, the dark-haired man apparently crossed a line because the blonde suddenly looked furious, stopped walking, spun around and started shouting back at him. I immediately took the opportunity to bolt for the end of the street, and although I heard the blonde shout, "Hey, where are you going?" and what I assume was both of them running behind me, I managed to round the corner and lost them by ducking down the next street, and then several more just to be safe. I didn't feel safe enough to go to my original bus stop, in case they stayed in the area and saw me, so I headed for one several blocks away instead, on edge and jumping at the slightest thing until I was on the bus and headed home. Although I tried to report the incident to the police, they weren't particularly interested since neither of the men had actually put their hands on me and I had no proof of what I assumed they were planning to do to me. I never heard about any abductions, assaults, or robberies in that area, so I'm hoping that they simply gave up after the plan didn't work with me. I'm glad that I was paranoid enough to save myself from that situation, but I do worry sometimes that maybe another girl, maybe she wouldn't be so lucky. This happened in July of 2021, around 2 to 3 in the morning, but I remember it like it just happened. I think about it more than I'd like to admit, but for some background, I've always believed in the paranormal and have had a couple of experiences over the years. What sets this one apart, though, is the fact that it was witnessed by another person who was a non-believer prior to this. So we were driving along what I think was Highway 212 in rural country somewhere between Bellaforche, SD and Hammond MT. We were going to a music festival in northwestern MT from KY and made it a point to not talk about paranormal activities and entities due to potentially manifesting something prior to leaving on the trip. My cousin was driving and I was in the passenger seat. The two others were in the back and we had been taking shifts driving so that we didn't have to stay at a hotel and could drive straight through. My cousin and I, we were on night shift due to the nature of our profession, which kept us awake at odd hours. We'd been passing the time by just messing around, listening to music, and looking at the local wildfire as we drove through. We had seen a lot of pronghorns and nice deer earlier in the day. Both of us being outdoorsmen, we were pointing out every game animal that we caught the faintest glimpse of. We were on a particularly barren stretch of road and hadn't seen a man-made light for miles at this point. No other cars on the road, no houses, nothing. But we were reveling on the novelty of it all as we didn't have stuff like this back home. I was the first one to point out the deer that was coming into view of the headlights. As we approached, there was clearly something off about this animal though. My cousin says, "Man, that's a weird-looking deer." The animal was sort of turned broadside to us, standing on the right side of the road facing the highway. It had its nose to the ground like it was foraging. The coat was an odd sort of greyish-white, which was odd as deer tend to stay more red throughout the summer. There was obvious flesh hanging from the antlers. This was also odd because the antlers were fully formed. Deer in July should still be in velvet, which means their antlers are still growing. They were also stark white, no sign that they had recently been rubbed. As we got closer, I could start to see that there were patches of fur missing. Not mange, but there were sores, open wounds, ranging from tennis ball to dinner plate size. The bones of the deer were also visible through the skin. It looked like an embodiment of a term that paleontologists use called shrink wrapping. And that's about the time that I noticed how disproportionate it was. The front legs were way too short, the back legs were too long, and the knees bent out to the sides, not backward. The spine was twisted and stuck up in random intervals down the length of the back. The neck was far too long to be on a buck. And then there was the snout. It wasn't built like a normal snout. It was stocky, rigid and angular. It looked extremely, predatory almost. It was almost as if something had taken deer skin and stretched it out over a wolf's skull. As the front tire became even with the deer's head, it looked up and it had some strange eyes too. I don't know how to exactly explain this, but they were a sort of deep brown, nearly red color. They were clouded but sort of hollow. Its tongue hung from the side of its half-open mouth. There were visibly pointed teeth, but they were not canine. Deer don't have top teeth in the front, but this one did. It looked like someone had grabbed a random handful of teeth from a jar and sort of glued them into this thing. Not just deer teeth, but a jar full of teeth from almost like random animals. Suddenly, though, time slowed down and I felt my heartbeat in my ears. My hands and ears got hot and I gripped the door panel. It locked eyes with me and I have never been so sure that I was about to die in my entire life. It maintained eye contact and followed me as we passed by it. My cousin said, in a manner of concern that I've never heard from him, "What the heck was that? Did you see that?" To which I replied, "Yeah," and he said, "Are we going to talk about it?" And I said no, and so we sat in silence. The air was thick and I could hear him breathing heavy over the other two that were snoring in the back. He was gripping the steering wheel with both hands. I turned the radio up and we just sort of sat there. We went until the next streetlights before we said anything to each other. We agreed not to discuss it until we were back from our trip. We took an alternate route home to see some things that we couldn't hit on the way up there, but I had the feeling neither one of us wanted to go back that way anyway. We've talked about it a couple of times since then. There are people that don't believe me when I tell them, obviously. Most people, though, can tell when I'm not making stuff up, and I don't look for opportunities to talk about it at all, really. If the conversation is right, though, I'm more than willing to share it, obviously. But I always get knots in my stomach thinking about it. I know what many things look like. I know what sick deer look like. I know what deer that have been hit by cars look like. I don't know what this was. I also don't know if anyone has any idea of what it might have been, or maybe had a similar experience, but I just thought that this might be the best place to share this and maybe get some people's opinions. Me and my fiancée just bought our first house, and it seemed fine and nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. But once we closed on the house officially, and have been doing some renovations before moving in, when I'm alone at the house like 9 to 10, something unexplainable happens. When we first started to get deep into our renovations, we noticed that when we came back in, one morning all the coat hangers in the guest room closet were on the floor. No one had been in that room all day while we were working. I started having freak experiences, the first time when I was working alone, with voices coming from other rooms and my voice being repeated back to me from the hallway. Then that same day, later into the night, I hear what sounds like footsteps and voices again coming from the living room, going into the attic as I'm in the guest room. I get a break for a couple of days from anything too noticeable going on after that. Then, just recently, I was getting ready to leave out on the front porch and hear what sounds like claps coming from the road in front of me. I've constantly felt like I'm being watched there, even when I'm not alone. I thought it was kind of isolated to the hallway and guest room, but after what I just experienced, I truly don't know anymore. I'm set to move in fully next week, and I'm wondering if there's anything that I can do to calm it down or something. This whole situation just seems to be getting worse, and that really worries me. Things used to happen to me that I cannot explain, and I still have trauma from them too. I'll try to describe them as best as I can, and I would be glad if someone who might know something about this could respond. So I lived with my dad in a house that wasn't pretty to look at. We didn't have much money, so the house was never fixed up. When all of my siblings left to live their own lives, I stayed with my dad alone. I was in my sister's room, and my sister used to experience paranormal phenomena in that room because of our dead brother, who died when I was young and used to visit her allegedly. At the time, I was in my sister's room and I didn't know about it. Every day at around 1 a.m, I would always hear noises though, and weirdly it was like someone walking back and forth on all fours. It was very disturbing to me, and then I heard and saw something pushing on the door, but it was closed, so it didn't open. This happened pretty much every day, so I started barricading the door with all sorts of stuff, wood and barrels and things like this, so that whatever it was couldn't get inside. This went on every day for about a week. I did an experiment where before going to bed I left the light on. Of course I was barricaded in again so no one could get inside. But the next day, I woke up and, to my shock, the light was off. The barricade was still in place, mind you, and I should note that I'm not a sleepwalker. And when I woke up, I thought the bulb had burned out or something, but when I tried the switch, sure enough, the light turned on normally, which meant that someone must have turned it off. The dad couldn't have gotten inside because of the barricade, so it couldn't have been him. And besides, he would have been upset that I left the light on like that, but he was calm, and the barricade was still intact. Because of these things, I started having sleep paralysis, I think, almost every day. Even a normal dream would turn into sleep paralysis, or I would experience it as soon as I was almost falling asleep. An example of this was that I was in a dream where I greeted a friend, and we were about to high-five, but before we could, everything started to sort of ripple and spin. We spoke in a language that sped up, slowed down, or was in reverse, a kind of language that gave me goosebumps. Suddenly, I woke up from the dream and saw the two of us in front of me continuing to speak in that strange language, and I noticed that our faces were deformed, like uncanny valley type of deformed. This lasted about 40 seconds before eventually I snapped out of it. When all of these things were happening, I was always scared to go to the bathroom. One time I went to the bathroom with a flashlight, and we had the bathroom window open. Outside the window was our dog's bed. Whenever he wanted to come to us, he would whine, but at that time of night, it was always this strange whining. Almost, I want to say, unnatural, and it would always get closer to the window. I would always quickly run back to my room before the whining got too close to the window, so I never did actually confirm that it was him. And so, does anyone know what the heck any of this could be? Why was this happening to me? What kind of thing or entity was doing this? I'm also wondering if the entity somehow influenced the sleep paralysis or something, making it so frequent, or if something else was living in my room with me. Honestly, too, I think it's possible because of the experiment with the light. I really would appreciate any of your comments or your feedback. I know lots of people don't believe in ghosts, and you know what? That's fine. I don't even know if what I have is a ghost. I don't really know what's happening at all, to be honest. Whatever is going on, it's happening more, and so I thought that I should get some help and share this. So ever since I was little, I've heard voices calling my name. Always feminine, never sounded the exact same, though it usually sounded like my mum. It's consistent too. For as long as I can remember, I've heard it. I honestly chalked it up to auditory hallucinations. I don't really have any mental illness that could cause it, but your mind can play tricks on you when you're alone, so that made sense to me. And I was always alone when it happened, so I kept it to myself and I just ignored it. Things around me would go missing consistently though, which I just thought was my forgetfulness. But I'd look somewhere for something, and then 3 days later, that's exactly where it was. It's been like this for a long time too, but it's never been something that affected anyone else. Until a few years ago, when my friend would hear another woman's voice coming through on phone calls, like someone was standing next to me, trying to sort of talk over me, but she could never make out what they were saying, and I personally never heard it too. I just assumed that it was something weird with my phone, and again I tried to ignore it. Also, I had this little glass bottle with a cork in it that would disappear and reappear, but always with something new inside of the bottle. Nothing crazy, but just stuffing from the dolls that I make out of fur for one of my dogs usually. I left it in a drawer in my living room, and I would check to see if it was there daily. It could have been my husband playing a prank on me for sure, but truthfully, he's not really the type. Though, since I never set up a camera to record him, I won't really know for sure. Anyway, fast forward to now, I'm staying with my parents for a short time. My mum and I are sitting in the living room talking to each other when, clear as day, I hear the voice call my name. It sounded like somebody was right next to my ear as well. I made eye contact with my mother and I asked if she heard it. She said, "Someone saying your name?" And I nodded. She said, yes, she heard it too. Now, this blew my mind because this is the first time somebody else has been around and heard it too. No one else was in the house as well. The TV was on, but we rewinded the show that we were watching and it definitely didn't come from the TV. Weird. But again, I chose to ignore it. Now, a friend of mine has been sleeping on call with me in Discord. I have a little mic on my desk that I use for streaming, and sometimes I have Discord connect to that mic. And at some point, my friend asked me if my little sister comes into my room in the middle of the night to talk. I was confused because, well, I'm a pretty light sleeper. I startle awake and it's really easy to wake me up. When anybody opens my door, I immediately wake up, in fact. But he explained that he would hear me snoring, but also hear my door open and hear a little girl talking, and said that it sounds almost exactly like my sister. He said that it sounds like she's playing. He cannot understand what she's saying, but it's loud enough that he was confused as to how I didn't wake up. I talked to my sister and confirmed that she said that it wasn't her. She said that she doesn't wake up for school until later in the morning, and even then she gets ready downstairs for the most part, usually just coming upstairs for breakfast. I again think that this is weird, but I choose to ignore it. If this is something paranormal, it doesn't feel angry or dangerous, so I'm not really too bothered by it. The other night, though, I woke up to my dog's kennel door being slammed open against the wall. It scared me half to death, and he was in bed with me. He freaked out after staring at the kennel for a few seconds and hid under the bed. I'll admit that I was a little bit spooked, but I just went back to sleep because, what else am I supposed to do? But then, a couple of days ago, I literally watched my bedroom door open on its own. Like, I heard the latch click and the door opened by itself. I can affirm that nobody was there and no one but me was home. I was getting ready for work, so Puppy was in the kennel. And with that, I decided to investigate a little bit because why not? Even if it's silly and not real, I like spooky stuff, so I thought that I would do some research. So I downloaded an app that records noises in the room around me while I sleep, and some sounds captured are clear footsteps, knocking, sounds like someone knocking against wood, and the one that gave me chills was something that sounded like a little kid gasping. It's not super convincing, so I won't share it, but honestly, it's been happening for so long I've just kind of decided that if I do have a ghost friend, I'm just gonna call her Patrice and let her do her thing. If it is real and not just my brain playing tricks on me, then I get to have a cool ghost friend, I guess. So yeah, I just wanted to share this experience that I've been having, and I'm going to keep recording, and if I can hear something other than a little tiny gasp, then maybe I'll share it at some point. If you have any ideas on what could be going on, besides the obvious it's the wind sort of stuff, then feel free to let me know because I'm all ears. I do like spooky stuff and I like to believe in it, so if you want to speculate or anything, then please be my guest. I honestly don't even know why I'm sharing this. It's not like anyone's going to believe me anyway. Maybe it's just to get it out of my head. Maybe it's some kind of warning. I really don't know. Last October, I went hiking alone near Mount Hood. I was trying to get away from everything. Work, noise, people. I found this spot in an old Forest Service map called Owl Hollow near Jordan Creek. And honestly, it sounded perfect. Secluded, quiet, barely even mentioned online. Well, the first few hours were fine, peaceful even, just the sound of the creek and my boots crunching gravel. It felt good, like I could breathe again. But sometime in the afternoon, that feeling started creeping in. You know the one, right? Like somebody's watching you? At first, I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being stupid. Big woods, alone, so of course you're going to feel a bit jumpy. But it kept getting worse. Around 3 p.m., I looked off of the trail and into the trees, and there were a pair of eyes staring at me through the brush, not blinking, just watching me. It wasn't a deer. I know what deer look like. This was different, lower to the ground, wrong shape, no sound at all. I kept hiking, probably faster than I should have, but I was a bit spooked. About an hour later, I came around a bend and there they were, a man and a woman standing in the middle of the trail. Now, I don't know how to explain it. Everything about them just felt off immediately, though. Their clothes were weird, like they'd walked out of an old photograph. Faded colors, stiff fabric, almost dusty looking. I tried to say hello, maybe ask if they needed help, but my voice just kind of died. They didn't say anything either, just stared at me. And when they passed me, they both turned their heads at the same time and smiled. I cannot even describe it right, but it just wasn't human. Their mouths stretched way too wide, and their teeth were wrong, a bit sharp almost and dirty, and their eyes, they just turned black. Not like dark irises black, but like bottomless pit black. I almost threw up then and there, and I almost ran, but they just kept walking like nothing had even happened, disappearing into the woods behind me. I should have left right then, I know. I should have turned around, sprinted back to my truck, never looked back, but I didn't. I kept going like an idiot. Another time that I set up camp that night, my hands were shaking so bad that I could barely get the tent up. It didn't matter though, I wasn't going to sleep anyway. As the sun went down, the woods around me got wrong, too quiet. No birds, no bugs, nothing but the creak and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Then, that was when I started seeing them. First one, then two, and then more. 17 or perhaps 18 of them maybe, crouched in the trees, peeking from behind rocks, half buried in the tall grass. All with the same twisted smiles, all with those black, dark eyes. I sat there by the fire, clutching my pistol, feeling like I was going to pass out from the terror. They didn't move. They didn't get closer. They just seemed to watch me. I don't know what snapped, but I stood up and I fired 2 shots straight into the air. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and painful. They didn't even flinch, though. That was when I ran. I grabbed my pack and ran like my life depended on it, because honestly, I think that it did. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't even remember driving home. I just remember slamming the door behind me and sitting there in the dark for hours, shaking, gun still in my hand. I haven't told anyone up until now, because I know that people think that I'm crazy. Heck, I think I'm crazy sometimes when I replay it in my head. But I know what I saw, and I'm telling you that if you ever find yourself out near Owl Hollow, just turn around. Get out while you still can, because some places are probably just better off forgotten. Just to give a bit of context first, I've been training for long-distance hiking for the past few months now. I cannot drive, so I tend to go in the local area, which, to be honest, I'm quite bored of now, but I also suck at reading maps, and I've been doing this solo, so I know that I can look after myself alone. Well, last Monday, I was on my usual trek. I'd become lost a few times and found myself on private land, when I noticed that I had just backtracked a bit. No issues. This happened 3 times on this particular walk, which had added an extra 10 miles now. I was heading back home my usual way, which I had done countless times, when I went over on my ankle a bit. I knew that if I went on my usual way that it would be an extra 6 miles, which I really, really want to do, so I looked at my map and saw a private route which cut right through the forest. I'm normally a rule follower for sure, but I knew that I couldn't make it in any other way, so I trespassed. Now, this route would be 3 miles shorter. I started down the path and all was well for the first half mile, There was a stream with a waterfall, which was all quite pleasant, despite the fact that I was dragging my leg. But then I noticed the forest was getting very dense and the trees were bigger than the ones that I'd seen in the other forest that I passed through. This really surprised me since I joke with my friends about all the trees looking the same, but the trunk on these trees were huge, the biggest that I'd seen, with the bases the size of a small house even. The trees genuinely looked like something out of a fairy tale. Further down the path, I noticed that there were sudden bluebells, more than I had ever seen, surrounding everything. This went on for about a mile, and then I noticed random 3-foot-tall stones that looked purposeful and very old. I'm used to seeing old stone markers, but something about the shapes were odd. Maybe markers or perhaps graves? I'm unsure, to be honest. I had seen animals all the way through my hike, but for some reason not here. Instead, it was eerily silent. I stopped to take a picture of the bluebells, and then what looked like a leg suddenly came out of the grass near the base of a tree. I jumped out of my skin. I'm miles from anyone on land that I shouldn't even be on without any signal on my phone. I thought it might have been a bloating body which made the leg suddenly pop up. I got myself together though and took a few deep breaths and went to check. I walked over and it was just a solid log. But I swear that I saw it come out of the grass near the tree, but it was a log. Well, I keep on walking but quicken my pace. Ankle is killing me at this stage. Then I heard a door slam. I can assure you though that there were no buildings here. Maybe it was just a tree? I'm trying to be rational, but what happened next really messed me up when I heard someone speak. But it was like right next to my ear. I could feel the warmth of the breath even. "Leave here" is what it said. I instantly turned around thinking that somebody was there, but there was no one. There was nothing there. But there was no way that someone could sneak off and run away that quickly. Well, I break out into a full sprint. To heck with my ankle too, I just need to get out of here. I reach the end of the path and it's a 15-foot tall chained gate. There's no way that I'm heading back down that trail, so I find that the top of one of the walls is broken, making it about 10 foot. I haul my 5-foot tall butt over it and I just sit by the side of the road for a minute, catching my breath. I was looking back through the gate, waiting for someone or something to show itself, but nothing ever happened. It's been over a week and I just feel the need to go back there. I don't want to, sort of, but I'm also just completely perplexed by what the heck happened. I understand that I might have dehydrated or something, but I've been doing this for months and nothing like this has ever happened before. This is England. There was no building or residence on that land. And really, I just have no idea what that was. This is a bit of a short one, but I would genuinely love your opinions. So, basically, me and my whole family were just camping at Penderosa Reservoir in California, if that name sounds familiar to anyone. Me and my brother, we were going fishing, and it's late at night by this point. We're walking down a trail 5 minutes away from our campsite, down to a burned-down cabin, which has trash everywhere, and everything about it is just creepy as heck. Someone could definitely stalk you from all the overgrowth there, so I don't know why we went fishing down there, but we tried to find a good spot, and as we go down, I start getting this feeling that something is just watching us, which I've never really felt before, until now, and it made me really creeped out. So much so that I had my brother walk me back. He ended up going back to the same spot to go fishing, unfazed by the whole thing. And while he's sitting on a rock, something starts moving down in the bush behind him. He was telling it to get away, and It stopped for a second, then he turned around and it was starting to move closer to him from what he could hear. So he moves to the other side of the fishing spot, and that is when he really started tripping because it moved with him through all the brush and the ivy growing there. Obviously, he really starts getting creeped out, but still continues to fish. Honestly, I don't even know how, but he's just crazy like that. He ended up catching another fish at some stage, and just as he's taking the hook out of the mouth, he hears it run again, and the fish flies out of his hand. My brother runs back to the other side. Also, too, in order to get to the fishing spot, you have to climb down a steep hill, and whatever this thing was right up the hill. As he looks up, he saw its face and neck, and he tells us that whatever it was, it had no eyes or mouth or nose, just ears, a neck, a sort of face, a sort of spot where a face should have been, and it was squatting in the bush. He screamed at it to leave him alone, and that's when he called us, so we go out to get him, and he ran it away as he was talking to us. We get down there to him, and he seemed like he was keeping it together just and didn't want to scare us. He told our mum what it was, and they didn't want to speak about it while it was dark. So he told us this morning, and I just cannot get over whatever this thing was. So I'm a 34-year-old male now, and this happened to me about, 30 years ago now. I've told friends and family, and they all swear that it was a bad dream, but I just know in my heart that it wasn't. Not many people remember things when they're that young unless it's really stuck with them, but I've never forgotten the fear that I felt, I guess. And I can honestly say that I remember it perfectly, as if it happened yesterday, in fact. So, I was a very happy kid growing up, youngest of 4 boys, huge age gap between me and my 3 older brothers. When I was 4 years old, though, I slept in my parents' room. I had a small kid bed in there with them. I don't remember ever having many experiences up until then, but even if I did, who knows if I would remember. But this I could not forget. I do, however, remember always feeling very scared when it came time for bed, I guess. I'm not sure what caused my stress, but I remember feeling really anxious. Well, one night my mother put me down for bed. Her and my dad also got into their bed. I remember I hated when my mum would leave. I always felt very scared, as if someone was around and could take me at any moment. I would always ask her to rub my back until I would doze off, and even then I would hold her hand so that she wouldn't leave. Even though my parents were only 5 feet away at their bed, I always felt uneasy. I never watched any scary movies or had any real reason to feel scared, mind you. I just sort of was. This night went like any other as well. Mum puts me to bed, I fall asleep, and at some point, or so I think, I remember I was laying on my stomach when I feel someone rub my chest and caress my face. I genuinely thought that it was still my mum who was there, but it felt foreign too. It felt like it shouldn't be happening. I was instantly terrified, but I was also too scared to fully open my eyes. In a moment of bravery, I slowly peeked with one eye. I probably woke up the neighborhood, but I screeched so loud that my throat instantly felt hoarse, because in front of me, I see just a dark figure, about 6 foot plus tall, no face, no nothing. It was definitely the figure of a body though, except it was a pitch black outline. I could definitely make out every detail as well. Arms, legs, torso. It was literally a body just standing there staring at me. The strangest thing is that I couldn't see any features though, nothing. It should be noted though that there was no furniture or nothing in front of me as well. My small little bed actually faced the room door. I felt tears just pour down my face and the terror was immense, but I couldn't look away. I was fixated while yelling as if I saw a murderer. I finally mustered the strength to close my eyes, and a few seconds later, I feel hands on my shoulders and I start swinging and screaming even louder. This time, though, it's my mother, and she tells me to calm down and that it's all okay. I quickly look around and the figure was now gone. I was sitting up in my bed with my mum's arms wrapped around me, and I was traumatized and scared. As I said, to this day, I have never forgotten about that night. The figure that I saw and the fact that I made my mum stay up until 4 a.m. because I refused to go into my bed is confirmation, too, that I haven't forgotten. I finally convinced her to let me sleep with them in their bed that night. Strangely enough, even now as an adult, I feel that fear that I felt when I was 4. Sometimes I wake up and open my eyes and I can feel and see that figure watching me. Now I'm less scared and tell myself that it's nothing and that it's all just in my head, and just turn over and go back to sleep. But deep down I feel like whatever it is, it still continues to visit me, and I don't believe it to be warm and kind. I believe it to be intrigued and devious. I don't talk much about experiences nowadays, but that first encounter, that one has never left my mind. I do believe that something was there. What though? I don't think that I'll ever know. I'm really not sure how to start this off, so I guess I'll begin with the very first encounter, if you will, that I can remember having. I've always been pretty skeptical of ghosts and all things paranormal. I have a hard time believing things that I've never seen or experienced firsthand. But some pretty tough things happened in my personal life, and they all led me to move in with my ex and his family, which consisted of his parents and his little brother. I moved into their house, and the first year or two, nothing weird or out of the ordinary happened. I do feel it's important to mention that I'd fall asleep listening to YouTubers often. Yes, I'm a bit weird, sue me, but anyway, one night my ex was gone on a 24-hour shift, so it was just me and his parents and his siblings. It was around midnight and I was playing a game on my PC. I had one of the headphones hanging off of my ear, and that's when I heard the noise of something smacking the ground. I turned around and was fully convinced that it was just one of my cats knocking something off of my bed. That's when I immediately noticed that all 3 cats were laying at the head of the bed, 2 of them cutely enough snuggled into each other. And then I see what fell. A small box of pads that I'd bought for myself a few hours prior. Now, I know that I had those set at the foot of the bed, but not so close that they'd slip and fall off the bed themselves. And even so, they landed about 3 feet out from my bed, so it wouldn't even make sense in the grand scheme of things, really. Because if they truly just slipped off the bed on their own, they wouldn't just land 3 feet away from my bed. It's a square box falling on even and flat ground, not a ball that has potential to roll or anything. I remember being really weirded out by that, but just sort of thought, weird, but whatever, and went back to my game. My next incident happened a few weeks later. Again, my ex was at work on another 24. It was around midnight, and I decided to give in to the grumbling of my stomach. I went downstairs, made me a little snack, and snuck back upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a sort of baby gate thing to prevent their dogs from sneaking downstairs at night and getting into things that they shouldn't. I was in the middle of snaking my leg sort of over the gate when I very vividly heard someone whisper my name. It was so odd. It sounded like it was right there in my ear as well, at the corner of the hallway. It was so loud, and it was a clear whisper. I mean, there was just absolutely no mistaking it to be something else. Plus, I have a pretty unique name, so it's highly unlikely that something else would imitate the sound of my name. I'd already had my phone flashlight on, albeit being pointed at the ground due to the act of me not so gracefully trying to scale over the baby gate. But I immediately flung my phone flashlight up and shone it in the direction of where I heard the whisper. And to my surprise, there was absolutely nobody there. In fact, the entire hallway was empty, so still and so eerie. I even poked my head into the bedroom of the parents and the little brother to ensure that one of them weren't playing a trick or a joke on me. And of course, everyone was sound asleep. I did ask the entire household the next day if they were messing around with me, and they just all looked at me like I was crazy. To this day, I still cannot explain just how real it was, and how loud and clear and concise that whisper was. The way that it dragged my name out, like how they do in horror movies. Every time I think about it too, it genuinely sends chills just down my spine. Anyway, about a year later, my ex and I split, and I moved back home with my mum. I haven't experienced anything since, but I do from time to time get that feeling of someone watching me. Like, sometimes it feels like I'm just not quite alone, I guess is the best way to put it. It never feels dangerous, I guess, just more unnerving. But that could very well just be my mind playing tricks on me, as I know a lot of people experience that phenomenon. I also feel it's important to note, too, that nobody else in that household ever experienced anything, or at least claimed to. In fact, they all thought that I was crazy or just imagining these things. It was just me who had these two experiences. But what do you guys think? Could this be an attachment? Could it have been something that was just lingering around the house at a certain time? I really don't know much about the paranormal world, and I spent most of my life not believing, up until these two incidents, that is. I've been living with my mother for about 6 months now, and like I said, nothing else has happened. Just that creepy feeling that refuses to leave. I've always been sort of a bit of a skeptic on all things paranormal, and while I do believe to some degree that there might be something out there, I usually take it with a grain of salt. However, I've started to notice some odd things going on in my home, and while I've tried to rationalize a logical explanation for what could be going on, genuinely I'm stunted. And honestly, I think that I should give it a shot, just throwing my story here to see if you guys can help me out. So, the first thing that happened was years ago, around 2020 to 2021, I believe. And I remember that it was late at night at about 11 p.m. or so. I'm certainly a bit of a night owl, so I stay up late often, usually just watching memes or reading or whatever. I get thirsty and go downstairs to get a drink of water. I'm by myself downstairs, my family are all in their rooms, and I heard no one getting up and moving around, so I knew that I was the only one down there. As I'm drinking my water, I notice movement out of the corner of my eye, outside of the window just above our kitchen sink. I remember it vividly too. It was a pale, transparent figure walking across the side of our house. I could clearly see legs, a torso, but it was also so dark and the only light being reflected was coming from inside of my home. At first, I was confused because I thought to myself, that wasn't what I thought it was it? I got concerned, thought maybe it was an intruder. So I went upstairs and told my dad. He takes his gun and our dog and starts walking around the house to search for this intruder, but he found nothing. I still cannot help but think of how weird it was though, because I remember where I saw the figure and the direction that it was headed. It led to a dead end at my house, so I don't know where it was going, who or what it was, or how it even got away. The second encounter, this one happened pretty close in time from my first story. I'd say maybe a couple of months later. And although I didn't see anything, it was the noise that it made that scared the ever-living you-know-what out of me. So again, it was at night. This time it was around, I would say 1 to 2 in the morning. House is dead silent, everyone is asleep, except me obviously, and I'm downstairs by myself getting another glass of water. Now, as I'm about to head upstairs, I freeze and all of a sudden I hear this terrible, inhumane and guttural snarl coming from the front door. I instinctively stopped moving, like every bone in my body was telling me not to do anything. Don't blink, don't breathe, and do not move. Whatever this thing was did not sound like any animal that I'd ever heard before. It couldn't have been a bear, since they don't come down this far. It could have been a dog with rabies or something, but it still doesn't explain the noise that it made. It just sounded wrong, and almost like full of hate. Whatever the case, though, it made me feel unsafe in my own home, which was completely locked up, doors and windows shut, lights off and all that. Yet there I was in the dark, not moving a muscle because my gut told me to just stand still, and I don't even know what I was hiding from. I think I waited a good minute until my body told me that it was safe to move again, and then I slowly tiptoed to the window by the door and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Nothing at all. No dog, no animal, no weirdo drunk, nothing. And so I just went upstairs and I went to bed. The third thing that happened, and this one was fairly recent, happened at the beginning of this year. This time it was around 8 p.m. It was just me and my 3 dogs and cat, and other than that I was completely home alone. I'm taking my dogs outside to go to the bathroom like I always do, and when they're done I get ready to open the door and I notice immediately that they're all pretty excited to come inside. Not that strange, but something just told me that it was a bit odd. Anyway, as soon as I let them inside and shut the glass door, I hear 3 taps on the glass directly in front of my face. I know that it happened too because my dogs heard it as well. Heads tilted, ears straight and everything. I remember looking up at it as soon as I heard the taps, and all I saw was just pitch black and an empty backyard. Nothing was in front of the door. In that second, I just looked away and shut the blinds, and in the end, I chose to ignore it. At first, I thought it was my parents coming home and they were trying to get my attention or something. But that confused me because why wouldn't they just come through the front door? Then I thought that maybe it could have been a stranger, which is an even bigger concern, I suppose. We have recently installed some security cameras outside of our house, and we have a camera pointed at our backyard sliding door. When I went to go and check the backyard camera, it showed nothing though. No recent events, no movement picked up. The latest footage recorded was from 5 p.m. and the live feed showed nothing. There was nothing outside, and yet I know that I heard 3 distinct taps on that glass in front of my face, almost as if it was, well, whoever it was, wanted me to know. I have no idea what any of this means, and I don't know why it started happening. So far, all I'm doing is ignoring it and hoping that it just goes away, but who knows? That is also really all I have to say. Believe it or not, I don't really care. I know what I saw and I know my truth, and, well, that's that. Just for some context, I live in Germany and I'm 23 now, but I was 20 at the time. So, I was on my way home from a party in the city. Since I'd been drinking, I took the tram. Unfortunately, I had to get off at a stop because the tram only went so far, about 3 stops from my actual destination, in fact. And since it was dark, around 1 or 2 in the morning, and I didn't feel like walking through a forest, I decided to wait 45 minutes for the next tram. There were a few houses nearby, a swimming pool and the forest, obviously. At the tram stop, nobody else was around. Then, a woman approached me. She looked to be around 50 years old with a backpack. She seemed quite confused, but not threatening. She was wearing slightly ripped jeans and shoes. She only asked me what my name was. I told her that it was Tom. She asked me if I was also taking the tram, and I said yes. Then, out of nowhere, she sat down on the ground and started telling me this story, warning me to be careful. She said that she had problems with some Bulgarians involved in pimping or something. It was so random that I just couldn't even really process it. She seemed drunk and also gave off the vibe that she might have a mental illness or something. Still, I felt like she needed someone to talk to, and people like that can be unpredictable, so I listened, even though it really didn't feel right. She kept talking about her daughter and her son, and then later claimed that she didn't even have a son, even though I had asked her how old he was. She kept circling back to the Bulgarians, though, like it was some kind of an obsession or a tic or something. She mentioned her daughter was a prostitute, and that she didn't want that for her, and she repeated that a lot. She asked if I had a girlfriend, but before I could answer, she immediately switched back to talking about her daughter again. This went on for about 25 to 30 minutes, until she asked me if I had a cigarette. I said no, and she said maybe she still had some. She started shaking out her backpack tissues and chains came out, and then suddenly a knife fell out of the bag. It was kind of like a small dagger, I guess, and I was a bit shocked and froze a bit. She kept looking for the cigarettes while I was thinking, oh no, this is getting way too creepy. The fact that she seemed mentally unstable didn't help at all either. She didn't find any cigarettes, sat back down on the ground and just said, well, I guess we're not smoking then. The knife was laying on the ground the whole time, mind you, and I tried my best to ignore it. My instinct was to run, but I didn't think that would be a good idea. I didn't know what might happen if I tried, so I stayed calm and kept the conversation going, asking her random questions. She never really answered directly, just sort of kept rambling, and eventually she gathered her stuff and picked up the knife. She asked if I thought it was cool or something, and I said, yeah, it's cool, or something like that. Honestly, I had no idea what else to say. Then she said a sentence that I will never forget. She said, I only used it for the Bulgarian. No one touches my daughter. She said it in a very serious tone, then laughed and said it was a joke. I forced a fake laugh, but by then I was way too creeped out. Thank God that the tram arrived shortly after that too. My goal was to sit at the very front near the driver, just in case anything happened, but out of nowhere, she decided not to get on the tram. No idea why. She stood up, said goodbye to me, and just told me to stay the way that I am. When the tram doors opened and I quickly got in, she waved at me and then disappeared behind a hedge. When I got home, I thought about it for a few minutes too. She definitely had some type of mental illness, but at the same time she was kind to me. Well, kind of, I guess. Like she had two personalities almost. Sometimes serious, sometimes nice. I still don't know what the deal was with the Bulgarian, but maybe he didn't even exist. Maybe she lost her daughter, and maybe that story was just a way of coping or something. Or maybe her daughter really was trapped in prostitution and she was planning something. I never did see that woman again, and honestly, that's probably for the best. This happened a couple of hours ago. I was puttering around the house, picking things up and making sure the house was set for the evening. As I walked into the kitchen to put some things away, I saw that the back sliding door was open. I remembered that I had heard the furnace kick on earlier, so I decided to close and lock the door for the evening to prevent any more unnecessary heat loss. I was about to tell my partner that I was locking the house up for the night when I remembered that I had left my tools outside. So instead of closing and locking the door, I opened the door and went out onto the deck to collect my tools. I gathered everything together, came inside, and was unable to close and lock the door for the night. After doing so, I announced to my partner that I had closed and locked the back door for the night as a way to help me remember and so that he was aware that it had been done. Simple enough, right? Side note too, I guess that he never heard me, but I specifically remember saying it out loud because this is something that I do to help me remember things better. If I say it out loud, then it doesn't stay stuck in my head and get forgotten. I hope that makes some sense. Anyway, immediately after closing and locking the door, I set my tools down on the kitchen floor and watched my cat come into the kitchen through the little cat door cut out of the bottom of our basement door, located in the kitchen. She likes sitting and staring out into the backyard when we have it open, so she's sort of been coming to the back door every time that she hears it open or close. Classical conditioning at its finest, right? Well, I then took the drill battery and the charger from the tools that I carried inside to the kitchen, and I put them in the island to plug them in. With the battery plugged into the charger and the charger plugged into the outlet, I began walking out of the kitchen when I suddenly got hit by a cold breeze. As I looked in the direction that I felt the cold air coming from, I was shocked to see my cat laying down and staring out of the sliding door that is now open about 6 inches. My mind started reeling, going over every second from the time that I locked that door to the time that I saw it open. It couldn't have been more than 20 to 30 seconds at most, and that's being really generous. Now, as my brain was breaking, I felt my whole body begin to shake and my eyes well up with tears. I had no control over this physiological response, nor had I ever experienced this type of reaction to a perceived paranormal event. I was so confused, and everything just felt so strange. I stumbled around for a few seconds trying to get my bearings. I finally made it to the living room and sat down on the armrest of the couch to tell my partner what had just happened. He got up to go and look and now opened the sliding door. He was skeptical, understandably, saying that I probably just got distracted plugging in the battery and forgot to close and lock the door. That totally sounds like something that I could do as well. That must have been what happened, right? Problem is that I remember exactly what my order of operations was from the time that I walked into the kitchen to the time that I stumbled out. I've certainly had some easily dismissible things happen since we moved into this house 8 months ago. Knocks, footsteps, shadows out of the corner of your eye. But all of this was so easily dismissible that it's not even worth mentioning. With one minor exception, I guess. I've gone downstairs in the morning to see one of the battery-operated taper candles turned on in our dining area 3 times within the past few months. The last time being only 2 days ago. But again, totally dismissible, right? But this time, I know that I locked it. So, now what? Is this a glitch in the Matrix? Does my cat have telekinetic powers? Or maybe a friendly entity opened it for her? I have no idea, and I'm sure that you don't either, but that's okay. I'm not really looking for answers necessarily. I just needed to get it out, and I figured that I could entertain a few people with a very real, very true story of a strange event that I just cannot seem to wrap my head around. So this happened last night. Around 3 a.m., me and my brother were woken up by a loud banging and crying at our front door. We live in a rough neighborhood, so naturally my brother grabs his shotgun, cocks it loudly, and starts yelling, "It's 3 a.m., go away," through the door. We were both really tired at this stage and freaked out. We'd recently had a girl from the neighborhood break into my car, so we assumed that it might be her again. I looked through the front door's window. We've got a one-way film on it, and didn't see anyone else around. I crouched near the door and listened, and it sounded like a young kid, completely hysterical, begging us to help her to call her mum. I told her that I was dialing 911 and that help was on the way. My brother, in full adrenaline mode, opens the door, still holding his shotgun, and starts yelling at her to calm down. I didn't agree with this approach, but in all fairness, she woke up about half the block from his screaming while she was pressed up against our door. After he opened the door, I finally got to see her as well. Honestly, I was kind of hoping that it was a homeless person from our area or even someone looking to do some weird stuff to us, but it was a kid. And the look in her eyes while she was kneeling at our doorstep honestly just made my heart drop. I was thinking that she was around 14, but she said that somebody crashed into her car down the street and that she left her phone in the wreck so she couldn't call her mother. Things weren't really adding up though, so I asked her a few more questions. She kept begging me to go down the street with her, but I told her no way. We're waiting for the cops. About maybe 10 minutes later, 3 tow trucks drive by, heading toward where we told 911 the crash happened, so I felt safe enough to walk with her down the street. On the way, she keeps asking to hold my hand, and I'm just thinking, you look like a teenager, you're barely dressed, and I'm a grown man walking through the neighborhood that you woke up. It's not a good look. I awkwardly asked how old she was, and she said that she was 18, and grabbed my hand anyway. I felt very uncomfortable, but her emotions were definitely outweighing mine at this stage. Halfway there, the cop shows up. I flag them down and explain the situation. Meanwhile, she's telling the officers over and over I have really bad ADHD and anxiety, while handing me her eyelashes, a full set of false lashes. I really didn't want to touch them, but I took them just to help her feel a little safer or whatever. One of the cops pulls her aside and the other starts casually asking me a few questions. He told me that they got another call about 30 minutes before that a teenager was running across someone's lawn barefoot or something, which I looked over and realized that she was barefoot the whole time. Then I saw them cuff her. I think they suspected that she was on something, which I was 50-50 thinking as well. As we're sort of wrapping up, the officer sees me still holding the eyelashes and goes, "What are you going to do with those, bro?" I just told him, "Well, I'll sleep on it. I just want to go back to bed, to be honest." I head home and start talking to one of the neighbors about it. He assumed that it was her parents' house or something, so he didn't want to get involved in domestic drama or whatever. Makes sense, and I just assumed that that's why nobody else got involved. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was shaken up and pretty worried about her, to be honest. I imagine that it was a traumatic experience for her too. I don't know if that was a justified reaction for her situation, or if she really was on drugs or mentally ill, but I will definitely be praying for her and her family, as obviously it's a bad situation. So, to set the scene, I'm a female and I'm 22, and literally weeks away from graduating from college and getting my bachelor's in theater arts. I actually only have a quarter of a credit left to get, so I'm doing work in the theater's department's costume shop to get that credit. It's really not anything too hard. I mean, I know how to do both hand sewing and use a sewing machine, so I've spent time doing both things and mending and adjusting garments for actors. The show, it's a musical, and there are some pretty intricate costumes though, so I was excited to help out to get that final bit of credit and graduate. The costume shop, it opened for weekend hours at around noon, but I stayed up late on Friday night, so I woke up at around 1. I got dressed and went to the costume shop as quick as I could, since I wanted to get all the hours possible. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but as I was approaching the theater building, something caught my eye. There was this guy standing off to the side of the front entrance. Now, the front entrance is pretty open. It's this set of pillars, and then there are 3 sets of glass doors that are led up to by a set of steps. Kind of Grecian, I guess you could say. The building is an old one, though, with an addition attached. That one containing the actual theater, while the older building contains mainly classrooms. But this entrance is closest to the way that I usually use to get backstage, and into the costume shop as well. Anyway, the guy was kind of leaning against the stone side of the staircase, and what caught my attention is that I go to school in a very small campus, so usually when I see someone, I immediately recognize their face, even if I don't know their name. But I didn't recognize this guy at all. Physically, he wasn't overly weird looking, maybe a little bit disheveled, but his hair was kind of greasy and he had on a t-shirt and some tattered jeans, I guess. He looked college-aged, same as me, but what was even weirder was that he was wearing this heavy winter parka, even though it was nearing 65 degrees, as well as snow boots. In any case, we made eye contact, and nothing immediately sheeved me out. I'm a bit of an awkward person, so I just kind of gave a polite nod and a smile, and that was that. Honestly, though, I do think that that was my first mistake. He didn't smile back, too. In fact, his eyes followed me as I walked up the stairs and into the building. Super weird, but, okay, whatever. My campus does have some weirdos on it. I found that my school in particular seems to attract them, but I'm a senior, and I was pretty sure that I had all of the weirdos pretty much catalogued at this stage. But Parker Guy was not among my mental catalogue of campus oddities. I got down to the campus shop, and I must have looked troubled, I guess, because the person who was already down there, someone that I know on a somewhat personal level, greeted me and then asked if something was wrong. I told them about the guy, which somewhat amused them, and we speculated on who he could be for a while before they went up to check. Apparently, though, by this stage, he was gone, as I was told when they got back. Now, I worked on sewing literally halved beach balls into a bikini top. The show is a funky one, and listened to a podcast. I got there at 1, and it was around 4:30 that the person there with me left, leaving me alone. By this point, I moved on from the tops and was sewing some snaps onto the back of the blouse to make it fasten better. I took a bit of a break to work on a project due Monday. The seniorities are strong. Then got back to sewing a bit, my headphones off this time as it was just me down in the shop. Now, for this next part, I'm going to have to give you a bit of an idea of the layout of the shop. So, it's in the basement of the building and is a bit hard to get to if you don't know your way around here. The room is relatively large though. It's sort of shaped like an irregular rectangle, I guess, but is separated by the tables set up in the middle of the room, the ones with the sewing machines on them. One side is on the way from the backstage behind the building's black box theater, as well as the dressing rooms, and then the other side leads out into this sort of hallway that has doors leading into the auditorium, as well as an exit out of the building. If that made any sense at all, then I'm really happy to hear that. But that direction also leads to the main costume storage room. Now, near where the sewing machine tables are is this door that leads outside and into what the costume director refers to as the weird little courtyard. When I was a freshman, I took a class with her and she warned us not to go out there since the door is locked from the outside, and if we do go out there, we won't be able to get back into the building. To be honest though, the courtyard is less of a courtyard and more a sort of space or an area where a bunch of buildings' machineries are, heating and cooling and all that, as well as electrical stuff, and it's all sort of located there together. It's all fenced in with a chain link fence about 15 feet high as well. But the door leading out there is one of those doors with a window. In this situation, I was sitting in a chair directly opposite the door, close to the wall across from it. So there was about maybe 20 odd feet of space between me and this door. It was nearing 6, but since the show's dress rehearsals started that Monday, I wanted to get as much done as I could before I finished up and went for dinner. I was working on sewing the snaps onto the shirt when I heard a noise. It startled me since I'd settled onto the rhythm of the task and listening to what my podcast was talking about, and annoyingly I dropped my needle. It was still connected to the thread, so it wasn't lost altogether, and so I bent down to pick it up from where it had fallen to the floor near my feet. And it was when I lifted my head from that bent position that I saw the source of the noise. My vision was a little bit obscured, because the space between me and the door was cluttered with a bunch of dress from mannequins that me and the other members of the crew had been using to put costume pieces on. So it was more that I saw the door's window wasn't empty anymore, I guess. I sort of shifted to the side a little bit to get a bit of a better look, and there at the door leading out into the maintenance courtyard was Parker Guy. The noise that I had heard had been him trying to open the door. Now, I have no idea how we got in there. That door is the only way into that courtyard, so I can only assume that he somehow scaled a 15-foot fence or something like that. But whatever the case, I froze like a deer in the headlights, and for a moment, it was just still as he stared at me and I stared at him. His face was expressionless, and it was as he continued to stare at me that I began to realize that this entire situation was wrong. I sort of settled back into my chair, really not sure what to do, and it was in this handful of seconds that Parker Guy started trying the door again. It was, as I said before, locked, so he wasn't able to open it, thank God. It's puzzling to me now as well that he didn't just come in through the front entrance, as none of the doors leading down to the costume studio were locked, but I don't know, maybe he tried that already, because, like I said, the studio is a little bit tricky to locate if you don't know your way around the building. The only conclusion that I could come up with is that he tried what I mentioned above, couldn't find me, and then while wandering around the building, saw me through the door through the chain link fence, and proceeded to scale it. And it was at that point, upon that realization, that I then began to get a bit scared. The door leading into the studio was to my left, and on instinct, I got up to close it since it locks from the inside and you need a key to reopen it. It was as I was moving to close the door that the guy began to pound on the courtyard door. I don't know why my first instinct was to hide instead of opening the door that I'd just closed and booking it, but I went into the small fabric storage room directly behind me, shut the door, and called campus safety. Again, I'm not really sure why I called them and not the police. Campo called them later, but that's what I did. I don't know, people make decisions like this when they're scared, I guess, but by the time the campus safety came to investigate, which was pretty fast since I was clearly terrified on the phone, the guy was gone. Honestly too, I don't know how he scaled the fence again in the time that it took them to arrive, but whatever the case, he was now gone. Campus safety escorted me back to my dorm and even went over to the dining hall to pick me up some dinner since I was very shaken, which I appreciated a lot. A while later, an officer came to take my statement since Campo called them, but as you can imagine, there wasn't much that they could do apart from keep an eye out for this guy. I still have no idea who he was or why he was even on campus, but it couldn't have been for any good reason. In fact, the way that he was behaving, it seemed predatory. This is something that happened to me when I was about 12 years old. I don't usually talk about it because people either don't believe me or they just don't care. But it's something that stuck with me for years, and when I tell you it, I can imagine that you'll understand why. So, it was during summer break. My cousin was staying at my house because he had broken his knee and needed help getting around and all that. He was a little bit older than me, but we were super close. We'd stay up all night playing video games, eating junk food, and just doing typical guy stuff. One night, though, I was in my room playing video games by myself. My cousin was in the living room. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I know that we were the only ones home at this stage. It was getting late, and I was about to shut everything down and go to sleep when I saw something. Something started crawling toward me in the dark. It looked human, but not quite. It was all messed up and deformed. The way that it moved, it didn't seem right at all. It also made these weird noises that I still have a hard time describing. At first, I thought it was my cousin playing some kind of a sick prank on me, until I remembered that his leg was broken. He couldn't even crawl like that if he wanted to. That was when I absolutely lost it. I ran out of that room as quickly as I could, and I didn't even look back. I told my cousin what I saw. He didn't really believe me, but I could tell that he was creeped out too. And after that, I refused to sleep in my room for at least a week. I just crashed on the couch in the living room and I kept the lights on all night. I ended up living in that house for another 6 years after that. Nothing quite like that ever happened again, but that room just never really felt right after that. I always had this weird, heavy feeling when I was in there,